A millionaire falls in love with a poor waitress, but before confessing his feelings, he decides to test her intentions. What he discovers changes their lives forever. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Marcus Sterling woke early, as he did most days, and dressed in his usual tailored suit, dark grey, pressed to perfection, paired with a silk tie in a subtle navy blue. Only a few years ago, he would have headed straight to his office in the financial district. But recently, he'd developed a small ritual, stopping by an unassuming cafe in downtown Boston. It wasn't the sort of place frequented by wealthy executives or top venture capitalists. The worn-out tiles by the doorway and the snug interior hinted at a more modest clientele. Yet it was here that Marcus felt the pull of something he couldn't quite explain. Each morning, the air smelled of roasted beans and fresh pastries. The chatter of regulars, students hunched over textbooks, workers grabbing coffee to go, echoed through the cozy space. At precisely 7:45 a.m., Marcus would step inside, quietly make his way to the corner table, and wait. He never lingered at the counter, never really interacted with anyone, until Olivia Foster would approach with her gentle smile. She was 28, petite in stature, with light brown hair usually pinned up in a neat bun. Though the cafe uniform of black slacks and a collared shirt didn't do much to highlight fashion sense, there was still something radiant about her presence. Olivia had a habit of greeting every customer with genuine warmth, no forced politeness, no corporate-sounding lines. It felt real. Marcus, used to encountering false charm or calculated interest from those who knew about his fortune, found her authenticity both comforting and unsettling. That particular morning, as she set a steaming latte before him, she offered a familiar nod and said, "Morning, Mr. Sterling. The usual for you?" He cleared his throat. "Yes." "Thank you, Olivia." He tried to add a smile in return, but it came out awkward, like an unfinished gesture. For the last few weeks, he'd noticed his composure wavering under her gaze. He blamed it on her kindness, her ability to make others feel important without any ulterior motive. She seemed so real. He sipped the latte, letting its warmth settle in. Outside, the Boston winter was beginning to show. Frost on the windows, a chill that seeped into his bones whenever he stepped into the wind. Inside, though, the cafe was snug, heated not just by the radiator in the corner, but by a sense of community. The regulars swapped stories about the local news, commented on the Red Sox, or teased each other about weekend plans. Marcus, however, sat alone. It wasn't that he lacked company in life. He had a bustling schedule of board meetings, investor calls, and social events. But all those interactions felt layered with pretense. He had never openly admitted it, yet he carried a deep-seated fear that people wanted him only for his money and status. It stemmed from betrayals in his past. An ex-fiancée who'd made demands once she realized the scale of his assets. A friend who'd gambled away a loan Marcus provided in good faith. Those memories haunted him, inching him toward isolation. From his table, he observed Olivia moving seamlessly between customers, refilling mugs and chatting about their families or daily struggles. When an older woman beckoned for help, Olivia hurried over, listening intently before offering advice with a calming assurance. Marcus couldn't recall the last time he'd been around someone so selfless. Just as he was finishing his coffee, the door swung open and a chilly gust swept into the cafe. Lucy Sterling, Marcus's younger sister by 3 years, strode in. She was a sharp-looking attorney in her early 30s, with dark hair clipped into a blunt bob. Spotting her brother in the corner, she approached in measured steps. "Marcus," Lucy greeted, tugging off her gloves. "Thought I might find you here." She eyed Olivia briefly as the waitress passed by, placing a second latte on a nearby table. Marcus exhaled. "You're up early," Lucy shrugged. "Big case. But I wanted to talk to you about dinner tonight. Remember the meeting with Richard Caldwell? He's bringing his wife." He stiffened, swirling the remaining foam in his cup. "I know. I'm going alone." "You can't keep doing this," she whispered, pulling a chair across from him. "Going alone to every dinner, every event. You make it look like you're allergic to people. I get it. You're cautious, but you have to let someone in at some point." He didn't reply immediately. His thoughts drifted toward Olivia, the same question echoing in his mind. Could she be different? Lucy snapped her fingers gently in front of him. "Earth to Marcus." He smirked wryly, shaking off the thought. I'm not ready." "Not yet. That's what you always say." Lucy stood up, sliding her gloves back on. "Look, you're my brother, and I love you. But you're going to wake up one day realizing you've shut everyone out." Before leaving, she cast a meaningful glance at Olivia. "You might want to think about it." Marcus watched Lucy's figure disappear through the door, leaving him with the hum of the espresso machine and the low murmur of conversation. He glanced at Olivia one last time. She was wiping a table, her gaze occasionally drifting in his direction. A polite half-smile lit her face when their eyes met. He rose, tugged at the lapel of his suit jacket, and quietly stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The fleeting warmth of the café contrasted sharply with the sting of the wind on his cheeks. Despite himself, he felt a pang of something he hadn't allowed in years. Hope. It scared him, but it also drew him in. Tomorrow, he decided, he would come back, and maybe, just maybe, he'd manage more than a simple thank you when Olivia brought his coffee. That same afternoon, Marcus found himself in his high-rise office overlooking the Charles River. Sunlight glinted off the water's surface, a serene scene at odds with the tension brewing inside. He had a crucial meeting with Richard Caldwell later, one that could secure a significant international contract for Sterling Technologies. Yet Marcus's thoughts weren't on the contract. They kept drifting back to Lucy's warning and the subtle spark he felt whenever he saw Olivia. Leaning back in his leather chair, Marcus glanced at the clock. It was nearly 5. The dinner was at 7 in an upscale restaurant known for fine wines and discreet service. He was expected to show up with a date, a small detail Richard had casually mentioned, but that Lucy had hammered home. In truth, a companion wasn't essential, but Caldwell liked the appearance of well-rounded family men at the negotiation table. Marcus loathed the superficiality, yet understood the political underpinnings. His phone buzzed with a reminder about the dinner. Exhaling, he stood and ran a hand through his neatly styled hair. Could he invite Olivia? The idea flashed through his mind again, but how would that even work? Approaching her suddenly, revealing that he was a multi-millionaire in need of a +1, it felt manipulative. He didn't want her to feel like a trophy or a convenient fill-in. And there was another problem. What if she said yes, just because he was Marcus Sterling, tech mogul? The old fear gnawed at him. He was so tired of second-guessing every interaction, yet Lucy's admonition about growing old and alone replayed in the back of his head like a broken record. He left the office in a swirl of conflicting emotions, his driver waiting with the car downstairs. Settling into the back seat, Marcus stared out the window at the bustle of early evening Boston. Streetlights flickered on, and pedestrians hurried across intersections, bracing against the winter cold. The city looked alive with possibility, a stark contrast to the subdued figure he felt he was becoming. At the restaurant, he walked in to find Lucy already seated at a corner table with Richard Caldwell and his wife, Evelyn. Lucy offered him a meaningful glance, a silent question. "Did you come alone?" "Yes, I'm alone," Marcus murmured in her ear as he greeted the table. He shook Richard's hand and bowed slightly toward Evelyn. "I hope you won't mind." Evelyn, A graceful woman with salt and pepper hair smiled politely. Not at all. Though I will say, I was looking forward to meeting the woman who's captured the famous Marcus Sterling's heart. Marcus cleared his throat, feeling a slight flush color his cheeks. Well, I haven't exactly. There's no one at the moment. Richard let out a booming laugh, tapping the table. Hard to believe, given your status, but I respect a man who's selective. Lucy forced a smile to keep the conversation light, though Marcus could sense her frustration. They ordered their meals, elegant dishes served in artful presentations, and quickly turned to business. Richard laid out his expectations, which included a potential expansion of Sterling Technologies into European markets. Marcus responded with his usual calm diplomacy, aware that part of Richard's decision might hinge on intangible elements like rapport and personal trust. Midway through the meal, Evelyn touched Marcus's arm gently. I do hope I'm not overstepping, but you seem preoccupied. Is everything all right? He hesitated. How to explain the swirl of unease about personal matters when, at face value, he had everything. I'm fine, really, he said finally. I appreciate your concern. Just a lot on my mind these days. Lucy shot him a sidelong glance as if to say, try not to seem so distant. Clearing her throat, she steered the conversation back to business, and Marcus offered detailed insights into how they'd integrate Caldwell's interests into their next product launch. 2 hours later, they emerged from the restaurant into the crisp night air. Richard extended a hand again. I'm confident about our collaboration. We'll finalize the contract next week, and Marcus, next time, bring someone. I'm looking forward to meeting the lady who eventually wins your heart. He winked playfully. Marcus managed a tight smile. We'll see. Lucy waited until Richard and Evelyn were safely in their car before turning on her brother. You sat there, tense as a coiled spring. Are you worried about the deal? He shook his head. The deal's fine. It's everything else. I know I teased you before, Lucy said more gently, but you're allowed to find happiness. You've earned it, despite what you might believe. He considered her words. It's not just about finding someone. It's about knowing if they want me. Or the money. Every time I let my guard down, it ends badly. Lucy sighed, crossing her arms against the chill. You'll never know unless you try. Maybe you're thinking about that waitress. Marcus stiffened, then exhaled slowly. Yes, Olivia, but I can't just appear out of nowhere and ask her to a corporate dinner. That would be too strange, and I'm not sure I even deserve the chance. Lucy reached for his hand. Look, dinner's over. The contract looks good. Just talk to her. You've got nothing to lose but your pride. Those words echoed in his mind as he slipped into the back seat of his car. On the drive home, he mulled over Lucy's advice, imagining 1,000 ways a conversation with Olivia might go. Each scenario played out with a mixture of hope and dread. He stared out the window at the city lights, feeling more certain than ever that something had to change, but unsure where to begin. Marcus woke from a restless sleep, haunted by fractured dreams that merged images of old betrayals with Olivia's calm smile. His penthouse apartment, a spacious modern loft with glass walls overlooking downtown Boston, felt somehow oppressive that morning. Even the sunlight filtering through the tall windows gave the place a stark, chilly edge. He dressed more casually, opting for a light sweater and dark jeans instead of his usual suit. As he made coffee in his state-of-the-art kitchen, his gaze fell on a framed photograph on the counter. It was him with Charlotte, his former fiancée, taken 3 years earlier. They were all smiles in front of a private jet, heading to a luxury vacation. He remembered how proud he'd felt, until the day she revealed her true colors, demanding access to his bank accounts and connections to secure her lifestyle. When he refused, she vanished as though he meant nothing. He set the photo face down, the memory too bitter to confront so early. His phone buzzed with a message from an old college friend, Greg, who'd lost contact after borrowing a significant sum to start a new venture, which turned out to be a string of ill-fated gambling attempts. Seeing Greg's name brought back that familiar sting of being used. Could he trust anyone's intentions anymore? By the time Marcus headed out the door, he was already on edge. The morning chill enveloped him as he slid into his car, determined to visit the cafe again. He told his driver to drop him a block away. Lately, he'd preferred to walk part of the distance, perhaps to gather courage, or maybe to appear less like a wealthy businessman. He wasn't entirely sure. When he stepped into the cafe, the comforting aroma of roasted coffee beans and fresh pastries clashed with his swirling anxiety. He spotted Olivia right away, but instead of going to his usual corner table, he hesitated, lingering near the entrance. The place was bustling, and Olivia looked busy, taking orders at the counter. He noticed the gentle slope of her shoulders, the slight flush to her cheeks as she moved from customer to customer, somehow keeping track of everything without losing that trademark smile. Eventually, she saw him and offered a friendly wave. Marcus moved to the side, waiting until she finished serving. When she approached, pen tucked behind her ear, she greeted him with genuine warmth. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling. Here for your usual latte?" He forced a small smile. "Yes, please. Though you can call me Marcus." Her cheeks turned a faint pink, but she nodded politely. "Sure, Marcus. Have a seat. I'll bring it right over." He settled at a table closer to the window this time, scanning the familiar surroundings. An elderly man in a worn coat sipped black coffee, reading the newspaper. A couple of college students quietly reviewed class notes. The cafe's hum lulled him into a more reflective state. By the time Olivia brought his drink, he'd managed to calm his racing mind. She placed the latte in front of him and lingered a moment. "You seem, I don't know, a bit different today. Everything all right?" He cleared his throat, taking a quick sip. "I'm fine. Just dealing with some old memories." Her brown eyes softened. "I understand. We all have a past, right? Though sometimes we carry more of it than we should." He looked at her, surprised by her insight. "That's very true. I've had my share of ghosts," she added quietly, then seemed to catch herself. "Anyway, if you need anything else, let me know." Marcus wanted to ask more about her past, about her life beyond this cafe, but a small group of new customers entered, pulling her attention away. He watched her go, feeling a weight on his chest. What ghosts could someone like Olivia have? Before he could dwell too long, his phone vibrated. It was Lucy calling. He picked up, keeping his voice low. "Marcus," she began. "You okay? I got a call from Greg earlier. He said he's been trying to reach you." Marcus exhaled slowly. I'm not sure I want to call him back." "Well, maybe it's time to draw a line, if he's just going to ask for more money." "I know," Marcus cut in, voice tense. "It's just exhausting. I'm tired of always being suspicious, but I'm also tired of being used." Lucy's tone softened. "I'm sorry. I really am. Listen, if you want a break from all that, maybe we can catch lunch tomorrow. We'll talk about anything except business or the family fortune." He managed a faint smile. "That might be nice. Thanks." After hanging up, he finished his latte in thoughtful silence. The restlessness that had plagued him all morning still stirred, but now it was tinged with a budding sense of longing. He glanced toward the counter where Olivia was handing out pastries. Whenever she laughed, it was genuine, lighting up her entire face. Charlotte, Greg, the countless acquaintances who disappeared once they realized they wouldn't be granted limitless access to his bank account. These memories loomed like dark clouds, warning him against hope. Yet here, in this unpretentious café, he felt drawn to something pure, something good. It terrified him because it wasn't built on the usual corporate foundation of deals and mutual benefit. Rising from the table, he left a tip by the saucer, more generous than usual, though he wondered if Olivia might interpret that as a show of wealth. He hesitated, then scribbled a quick note on the napkin. "Thank you for being real." Placing it beneath the coffee cup, he slipped out before he could lose his nerve. Outside, a gust of wind made him shiver. As he walked back toward his waiting car, he replayed Olivia's quiet words about ghosts. Could he dare to believe that someone like her, kind, genuine, radiant, had secrets of her own? Or was he reading too much into a casual remark? One thing was certain. The shadows of his past weren't done with him yet. And if he was ever going to break free from their hold, he needed a new kind of courage, one that might start with the most ordinary gesture of all, a simple conversation with a remarkable waitress. Early the next morning, Marcus decided to return to the cafe despite a tight schedule of meetings. He felt an inexplicable urge to see Olivia again, to find out more about the gentle spark he sensed whenever she spoke. The winter wind bit at his cheeks as he walked briskly from where he'd asked his driver to drop him off. Stepping inside, he was greeted by the aromatic swirl of fresh beans and a rush of warm air. Olivia stood at the espresso machine, her hair done up in the usual neat bun, but today she wore a lavender scarf, likely to combat the drafty front door. Catching sight of him, she gave a reserved wave, as though unsure if his presence was mere coincidence. He settled at a small table near the window. Within minutes, she brought over a cup of black coffee, raising her eyebrows in silent question. "I decided to switch it up today," he said, tapping the mug. "Hope that's okay." She smiled. "Of course. I just wasn't sure if you'd want something different after, well, your note yesterday. It was thoughtful, by the way." Heat crept across Marcus's neck. He hadn't planned on leaving a note, but the moment had felt right. "I'm glad you didn't find it odd." She lowered her gaze, fiddling with a stray napkin. "Not at all. It was nice." They were both silent a moment, the background chatter of the cafe filling the gap. Finally, Marcus gestured to the chair opposite him. "If you have a minute, I'd like to talk." Olivia hesitated, eyeing the queue at the counter. One of her co-workers, an older man named Ben, gave her a nod that seemed to say, "Go ahead, I've got this." Relieved, she slipped into the seat across from Marcus. "How long have you been working here?" he asked, taking a sip of his coffee. It was robust and slightly bitter, far from the sweet comfort of his usual latte, but he found it fitting somehow. "Almost 2 years. It's not what I planned for my life, exactly, but it helps pay the bills." She paused, adding quietly, "and supports my work at night." Marcus tilted his head. "Work at night." A flicker of hesitation crossed her face. "I, help coordinate a small adult literacy program. We run evening classes in a community center not far from here." She laughed softly at his surprised expression. "I know. It sounds like a lot. But my parents always taught me that if you have something to give, even if it's just your time, then you should." Her words resonated with him more than she could know. "That's incredible, Olivia. Really, I admire that you use your time to help others. Most people would be at home, resting after a full day at work." She shrugged, though a hint of pride shone in her eyes. "I'm not saving the world, but it does feel good to help someone read a book to their grandchild for the first time." Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing her sincerity. In his world, charity often came in the form of big checks to well-known organizations, but rarely did it involve personal, hands-on commitment. He watched her expression, the way her eyes lit up at the thought of helping others, and felt his defenses crack further. Before he could probe more deeply, the front door jangled open and a group of new customers shuffled in, stamping snow from their boots. Olivia stood, smoothing her apron. "I should get back, but thanks for asking about it." He gave her a gentle smile. "Of course. Thank you for sharing." After she left, Marcus sat there for a moment, considering how someone with so little time or resources could devote herself so fully to others. His business world was full of people chasing profit margins, expansions, and buyouts. Here was a person chasing something else entirely, the well-being of neighbors and strangers alike. He was so lost in thought that he barely noticed Lucy enter, shaking snowflakes off her coat. She spotted him immediately and slid into the chair Olivia had just vacated. "You're here again?" Lucy teased, but there was genuine curiosity in her tone. "I guess you took my advice." Marcus swirled his coffee, swirling his thoughts right along with it. "I'm just learning more about the place." Lucy eyed him knowingly. "And the waitress?" He didn't bother denying it. "Her name's Olivia. She runs a literacy program at night. She seems truly selfless." Lucy's gaze softened. "That's good. I've never seen you this intrigued by anyone. How do you feel?" Marcus set his mug down. "Conflicted, honestly. Part of me wants to ask her out, maybe get to know her better, but you know my history, Lucy. Every time I open up, I end up getting hurt. Or used." Lucy placed a hand on her brother's arm. "You won't know if you don't try. And she doesn't exactly strike me as the gold digger type." A small smile curved Marcus's lips. "You're right about that. She's different. Still, I'm afraid." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "What if she doesn't see me as just a man, but a giant checkbook?" Lucy sighed, pulling her scarf tighter. "Marcus, I can't promise you that won't happen, but from what I can tell, you'd regret it more if you never take the chance." She stood, glancing at her watch. "I have to run to court. Talk later." He nodded, feeling a rush of gratitude for her support. As Lucy left, Marcus realized he should also head out. Meetings awaited him, after all. Yet he lingered another minute, watching Olivia serve a table of regulars. He felt a subtle tug in his chest. There was a connection forming between them, fragile but unmistakable. Stepping outside into the swirling snow, Marcus resolved to take things slowly, to let trust grow organically. He couldn't quite shake the undercurrent of fear, but for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of optimism. Maybe his life could hold more than boardrooms and cautionary tales. Maybe, if he dared, it could hold something real. Marcus stood under the cafe's striped awning one rainy afternoon, watching heavy droplets dance along the pavement. He'd arrived earlier than usual, hoping to see Olivia before the typical morning rush. Despite the grim weather, the cafe still exuded its familiar warmth, the windows fogged from steaming espresso machines and baked pastries. Pulling open the door, he slipped inside, greeted by a cozy bustle of activity. Olivia was at the counter, speaking softly to an elderly lady in a worn coat. He recognized her as Mrs. Mildred Baker, a longtime customer who often sat for hours nursing a single cup of tea. Olivia seemed concerned about something, and Marcus caught fragments of their exchange, talk of rent, late payments, eviction fears. As Mrs. Baker shuffled away, Olivia sighed, clearly troubled. Marcus approached, umbrella in hand. "Good afternoon," he began, voice tentative. She glanced up. Despite her worry, she offered him a polite smile. "Afternoon, Marcus. Quite the storm outside." He nodded. "I overheard something about rent issues. Is everything all right?" She hesitated. "It's just, Mrs. Baker is my landlord, sort of. I help her pay the bills so she can keep her apartment. She's had a rough time since her husband passed. Now the building owners are raising rent. Well, it's complicated." Is there anything I can do? The words emerged before he could stop them. He realized, abruptly, that he was stepping into personal territory, but the look on Olivia's face told him she wasn't offended. She just seemed surprised. Honestly, it's something we'll figure out. I don't want to burden anyone else. She paused, wringing her hands. But thank you. Marcus nodded slowly, feeling a pang of admiration for her resolve. Here she was, working long hours at the café, running an adult literacy program at night, and still caring for an elderly friend's well-being. He felt an urge to help, but he also recognized that diving in with money might only feed his worst fear, that people could see him as nothing but a walking bank account. Anyway, she said, trying to lift the mood, your usual latte, or do you want another black coffee? He mustered a slight grin. Let's go with the latte today. It's a latte kind of day. Olivia jotted down the order, then caught sight of him clutching his umbrella. Grab a seat, she said, nodding toward a quiet corner. I'll bring it over. Marcus settled into the corner, heart pounding with an odd mixture of guilt and excitement. Guilt because he hadn't revealed who he really was. Excitement because the more he saw of Olivia, the stronger he felt about her. Lucy's words reverberated in his mind. Maybe you'd regret it more if you never take the chance. A few minutes later, Olivia arrived with the latte, foam swirling in a delicate pattern on top. She lingered, leaning in slightly. I haven't seen you in a few days. Everything all right? He nodded, picking up the cup. Just work. Meetings, deals. You know how it is. She tilted her head. Must be busy being a professor, especially this time of year, right? Finals approaching? Marcus's grip on the cup tightened. He'd let slip a half-truth, that he had a background in finance and sometimes lectured at business seminars, but he'd never corrected Olivia when she assumed he was a full-time professor. He swallowed, feeling the weight of the falsehood. Yes, it can be, he managed. By the way, how's the literacy program going? Still attending to a full house? Her face lit up slightly. We are. Some weeks are tougher than others, especially in this weather, but we keep going. It makes a difference in people's lives, and that's all that matters. He nodded, impressed by her quiet determination. A surge of longing rose within him. He wanted to share more of his own life, to let her see past the careful facade he'd built. But the fear of losing her trust if she discovered his true identity paralyzed him. They were momentarily interrupted by a small commotion. Someone dropped a plate, and shards scattered across the floor. Olivia excused herself to help clean up. Marcus watched as she knelt to gather pieces, uncomplaining, comforting the apologetic co-worker who'd fumbled. He sipped his latte, mind racing. There was something he needed to do, either come clean or find a way to test if her intentions were genuine. His heart pounded at the second option. He'd seen movies where wealthy heirs pretended to be poor to find true love, but this was reality. It felt manipulative, yet the thought of trusting blindly filled him with dread. A few minutes later, Olivia returned, wiping her hands on a towel. Sorry about that. Everything's fine now. He hesitated, then took a breath. Hey, there's a business dinner I might have to attend soon. If you're free sometime, maybe we could... He paused, swallowing hard. I mean, I'd like to get to know you better. Maybe have coffee or dinner outside of the cafe. Her eyes flicked with curiosity, but she took a step back. Oh, that's kind of you. But I have to be honest, I'm a bit cautious about mixing personal and professional life. She glanced around the cafe, then added gently, I've had my share of complications. A twinge of disappointment cut through him, but he kept his voice steady. I understand. If you ever change your mind, let me know. She offered a hesitant nod. I will. Thank you. As she walked away, Marcus felt the chasm of his own creation widen. He knew that if he truly wanted to invite her into his world, he'd have to do it honestly. But the fear of being used, of repeating past mistakes, held him back. Stepping out into the continuing rain, he gripped his umbrella tight, water splashing around his polished shoes. There, on the wet sidewalk, he made a decision, albeit a hesitant one. He would find a way to test her intentions, if only to protect his heart. Yet even as resolve formed, a pang of guilt twisted in his stomach. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to cross a line that might bring him closer to the truth or drive a deeper wedge between them. Marcus Sterling paced across the polished hardwood floor of his penthouse living room, the distant lights of Boston flickering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Night had settled in, bringing a hush that only emphasized the swirl of thoughts in his mind. He checked the time on his phone. Any moment now, Howard Green, his old college professor and one of the few people he truly trusted, would arrive. Howard was 60, a distinguished academic from Harvard with a deeply lined face and a calm presence that Marcus had always found comforting. While many saw Howard as a formidable intellectual, Marcus knew him as a man who listened first and judged rarely. A soft knock at the door prompted Marcus to exhale in relief. He crossed the living room and opened it to find Howard standing there in a tweed coat, his salt and pepper hair slightly tousled by the wind. "Come in," Marcus said, stepping aside. Howard offered a warm grin. "Quite a view you've got here, son. It's been a while since my last visit." Marcus nodded, leading him toward a seating area by the window. "Coffee or tea?" "Tea, if you have it," Howard replied, settling onto the sofa and gazing out at the glittering skyline. "I'm cutting back on caffeine." Marcus busied himself in the kitchen, heating water and gathering cups. It felt oddly domestic, this moment of preparation, especially given the turmoil inside him. After a few minutes, he returned with 2 mugs of steaming tea. The aroma of chamomile wafted between them. Howard took a careful sip. "Now," he began in his gentle baritone, "you sounded troubled on the phone. Something about a woman you've met." Marcus looked into his tea, then back at Howard. "Her name's Olivia. She works at this small café I've been visiting. She's genuine, kind, different from anyone I've known in a long time." "So where's the trouble?" Howard asked, eyebrows drawing together. Marcus set his mug down on the coffee table. "I'm afraid she might be another Charlotte, or another Greg. Someone who'll eventually see my money as the real prize. I know that sounds cynical, but it's happened so often before." Howard nodded thoughtfully. "You've had your share of betrayals. It's natural to be cautious, but I don't want to push her away," Marcus continued. "Lucy's been telling me I need to open up. Part of me wants to just tell Olivia who I am, show her my world. Another part wants to test her, to be absolutely sure she's not interested in me only for my fortune." Howard's gaze turned pensive. "Testing someone's character can be a dangerous path. You risk betraying trust before you even give it a chance to form." "But I understand the dilemma." Marcus felt his heartbeat quicken. "I was thinking about presenting myself more humbly, like just a modest professor of finance, not the founder of a multi-million-dollar firm." Howard studied him for a moment. "If you go down that road, you have to be prepared for the consequences. Deception can breed more deception. Are you sure there's no better way?" Running a hand through his hair, Marcus stood and walked to the window. The city below looked peaceful, but inside he felt the tension coil. "I don't know," he admitted. "She's already assumed I'm a professor because I mentioned I lecture sometimes. I haven't exactly confirmed or denied it outright. The charade sort of took shape on its own." Howard set his tea aside and rose, joining Marcus by the window. Their reflections glimmered on the glass, 2 figures lost in thought. "Let me offer this. Whatever you decide, do it wholeheartedly. If you choose honesty, Be fully honest. If you choose to keep up a pretense, recognize the moral burden and be prepared to confess eventually. Secrets can destroy relationships. Marcus turned to face the older man. You're not going to tell me it's completely wrong. The professor smiled wryly. Right or wrong depends on your intention. If your aim is to manipulate, I'd say it's wrong. If your aim is to protect your heart, I understand the impulse. But remember, no relationship can be built on half-truths forever. Silence hung between them for several beats, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Marcus thought of Olivia's earnest eyes, the way her entire face lit up when she talked about helping others. Would she forgive him if she found out he'd lied? Finally, Howard placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You've spent years locked behind your own walls, Marcus. At some point, you must step out. Risk is part of life, especially the good parts. Marcus swallowed hard. I appreciate your perspective. I just worry that if I'm honest too soon, she might be swayed by my wealth. And if I lie too long, she'll never trust me again. Howard's expression was gentle. That's the crux of it, isn't it? You have to decide which risk is worse. They talked for another hour, the conversation meandering through recollections of Marcus's college days and the idealism he once held. By the time Howard departed, Marcus felt a strange mix of clarity and dread. The older man's words echoed in his mind. At some point, you must step out. Standing alone by the window, Marcus watched the city lights glimmer like distant beacons. His plan wasn't fully formed, but he knew he couldn't keep drifting aimlessly between fear and longing. Whether it was right or wrong, he would continue letting Olivia believe he was just a modest finance instructor. For now, he needed to see her unfiltered reactions to a simpler version of himself. Only then, he told himself, could he be sure her feelings were genuine. Yet, as the elevator took Howard down, Marcus felt the first true pang of guilt pressing against his chest. He wondered if this test would cost him more than he was prepared to pay. The next morning, Marcus woke early, a tangle of new determination and lingering doubt filling his mind. He dressed casually, khaki pants, a sweater, and a light jacket, hoping to blend in better at the café. He'd already called his office, telling his assistant he'd be out until midday. He needed to finalize his plan for how to approach Olivia without revealing his wealth. Stepping onto the street, he decided to forego his driver entirely. Instead, he headed to the T station, purchasing a ticket like any other Boston commuter. The train's metallic screech and the faint smell of damp newspapers were unfamiliar elements in his routine. Typically, he traveled in the comfort of a private car, sealed off from the city's hum. Today, he embraced it, feeling oddly exhilarated as he stood among strangers, occasionally gripping a handrail when the train lurched. When he emerged downtown, the cafe was still a few blocks away. He walked the distance, noticing storefronts he'd never paid attention to, small boutiques, a used bookstore, a florist with a rainbow of blooms. That blossoming sense of novelty reminded him of who he was before the money and betrayals made him guarded. Inside the cafe, a lively morning crowd bustled about. Students with laptops huddled in corners. A few construction workers laughed together at a table near the front. Olivia was behind the counter, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail, brightening an already vibrant space. She spotted him, surprise flickering across her features. "Marcus, you're here earlier than usual." He offered a mild shrug, trying to appear casual. "Had some free time this morning. I thought I'd get breakfast." He approached the counter, scanning the menu as if he'd never noticed it before. In truth, he was used to ordering the same drink every time. "How about a plain black coffee and, a blueberry muffin?" Olivia gave him an amused smile. "Daring today, are we?" He laughed softly, then caught himself wishing the moment could last. Yet the weight of his deception lingered. He ordered, paid in cash, and stood off to the side while Olivia expertly worked the espresso machine. When she handed him the coffee and a paper bag with the muffin, she leaned over the counter, lowering her voice. "Will you be sitting down? I might have a chance to chat in a bit if it's not too busy." Marcus nodded, heart skipping slightly. "Sure, I'd like that." He picked a small table by a window that overlooked the sidewalk. While nibbling at the muffin, he half listened to the cafe's ambient sounds, a barrage of names called out for cappuccinos, the hiss of steaming milk, lively conversations. Every so often, he glanced at Olivia, marveling at how effortlessly she managed the hustle. Eventually, she found a spare moment to break away. Approaching him, she smiled apologetically. "Sorry, it's a bit hectic. We had a couple of people call in sick." "No worries," he assured, gesturing at the chair opposite him. She slid into it, momentarily resting her elbows on the table. They exchanged small talk about the weather, and he asked about the night classes she led. She mentioned she'd been drafting a new curriculum for higher-level literacy, hoping to prepare her students for GED exams. Marcus found himself enthralled by her dedication, the way her eyes lit up when describing the success stories of her students. "I'm curious," Olivia said, tilting her head. "Do you ever think about doing something besides teaching finance? You mentioned you do some lectures, but what's your real passion?" He stiffened slightly, but forced a relaxed smile. Well, I guess you could say I'm into tech too. But teaching, educating others, has always felt fulfilling. It wasn't entirely untrue. He did enjoy imparting knowledge, though usually it was in the context of investor summits or product launches. She nodded thoughtfully. "That's good. Real passion should make a person shine. Honestly, it's what I feel when I'm helping people learn to read." He swallowed, observing the sincerity in her voice. This was what he feared losing if she discovered his subterfuge too soon. Despite that spike of guilt, he continued the conversation, carefully painting himself as a middle-class lecturer who scraped by comfortably but didn't boast vast wealth. He described a modest one-bedroom apartment near the university, an entirely fictitious scenario that made him cringe internally. The cafe's bell chimed as a new wave of customers arrived, and Olivia rose from the table, smoothing her apron. "Back to work for me," she said softly. "I'll see you round." Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, definitely." She walked away, weaving through the crowd to the register. Leaning back in his chair, he exhaled. He'd crossed a line today, telling half-truths, feeding the idea that he was just a regular working man. He told himself it was necessary to protect both of them from a potential heartbreak if her feelings weren't genuine. Yet a subtle dread tugged at him. He was leaving the realm of his ordinary life, where everything was controlled by wealth and status, and stepping into a new world of simpler interactions. The thrill of anonymity felt like a final push away from his usual routine, but it also spelled deeper entanglement in a web of deception. As he finished his coffee, he couldn't shake the sense that he was forging a path that would demand an even greater reckoning down the line. A brisk wind brushed across Marcus's face as he left the cafe that morning, heading toward the community center Olivia had once mentioned. He had no specific plan other than curiosity and a deep desire to see the side of her life she spoke of with such passion. The building wasn't far, just a few blocks away in a less affluent part of town. His footsteps echoed on the uneven sidewalks, where cracks sprouted weeds and the streetlights looked older, dimmer. He passed by a small grocery store displaying neon signs for daily deals, a laundromat with chipped paint, and finally arrived at a large, weathered brick structure with a modest sign reading Riverside Community Center. It looked functional rather than inviting, but Marcus felt his heart pound with interest. Slipping inside, he found a volunteer at the front desk, a middle-aged man wearing a threadbare cardigan. The man greeted him with a polite smile. "May I help you?" Marcus cleared his throat. "I'm just looking around. I heard there's an adult literacy program here in the evenings. I'm a teacher, interested in seeing what kind of curriculum they offer." The volunteer nodded, beckoning him forward. "Yes, we have classes most weeknights. The main coordinator is a young woman named Olivia Foster," Marcus supplied, unable to hide a small grin. "I've met her. Right, she's wonderful." The man's expression brightened. "Her classes are popular. Most folks who come here need basic reading skills, but she's also started helping some prepare for more advanced tests. Are you thinking of volunteering?" Marcus froze. He hadn't anticipated that question. "Possibly," he said slowly. "I'd like to know more about what she does first." The volunteer waved him along. "Feel free to look around." "Though Miss Foster isn't here until later in the day," Marcus thanked him, wandering deeper into the center. He passed a multi-purpose room where seniors were playing bingo, laughing over their cards. Another room housed a small library with donated books, worn spines bearing testimony to years of reuse. The entire place felt worlds apart from the glossy corridors and high-tech offices that defined his usual environment. Moving on, he found the classroom designated for literacy programs, a simple space with plain walls, folding chairs, and a whiteboard. A box in the corner overflowed with paperbacks and worksheets. Nearby stood a shelf packed with dictionaries and basic grammar books. Though unremarkable by typical corporate standards, the room emanated a quiet sense of purpose. He could practically envision Olivia guiding her students through each page, encouraging them with soft smiles and unwavering patience. The thought warmed him. Despite the mismatch between this humble setting and the glamorous lifestyle his wealth afforded, he felt a strange sense of belonging here. If only he could stand by her side, helping in a genuine way. A small group of volunteers entered, chatting animatedly. Marcus stepped aside, listening unobtrusively. They were discussing plans to expand the classes, mentioning Olivia's name more than once. "She's got so many ideas," said a woman with curly hair tied back in a scarf. "I just wish we had the funds to update our materials." Another volunteer, a bearded man in his early 40s, sighed. "And to fix that leak in the ceiling. Last winter was brutal. Olivia's still trying to figure out a fundraiser." Marcus felt a pang. He had the resources to solve these issues without blinking. But that would mean revealing the truth about himself. He couldn't just swoop in as an anonymous donor. That would raise too many questions. And if Olivia suspected him of playing a benevolent millionaire, she might question his motives more than ever. As he left, a new sense of resolve took hold. He would find a way to help, eventually. But only after he was certain Olivia wanted him for who he truly was, not for what he could provide. That evening, after a day of back-to-back meetings and phone calls at Sterling Technologies, Marcus found himself reluctant to retreat to his quiet penthouse. Instead, he opted for a light meal at a local diner, sipping black coffee in a corner booth. He resisted the urge to check his stock portfolio or business emails, focusing instead on the swirl of ordinary life around him. His mind drifted to a memory of his father, Horace Sterling, sitting in a grand study, lecturing a young Marcus on the importance of trust, but only in the right people. Horace had built his empire with sharp instincts and relentless ambition. Along the way, though, he'd left behind a trail of hard feelings and broken partnerships. Perhaps that was why Marcus struggled now. He had inherited both the fortune and the wariness, a double-edged sword. Finishing his meal, he strolled the streets, eventually pausing before a quiet park bench under a street lamp. The night air was crisp and fragrant, with the scent of damp leaves. A realization struck him. He was stepping into a world far removed from opulent banquets and exclusive clubs. Here, he was Marcus, the teacher, blending into the rhythms of everyday people, and surprisingly, he felt lighter. Yet, beneath that lightness, guilt coiled like a snake. This new life, after all, was built on an elaborate omission. If he grew closer to Olivia under false pretenses, what happened when the truth came out? How would she see him? He feared the day she might look at him with betrayal in her eyes. Still, he couldn't turn back. Not now. Stepping away from the bench, Marcus cast a final glance at the tranquil park. The city lights glimmered in the distance, a reminder of the wealthy world waiting for him. But for the moment, he was part of this unassuming realm, one that might offer real human connection or might lead to heartbreak if his secret unraveled too quickly. With renewed resolve, he pocketed his hands and walked on, determined to keep treading this narrow path between honesty and deception. He only hoped he had the strength to face the consequences once he fully entered Olivia's sphere, not just physically, but emotionally. After all, crossing into someone's world was never a simple affair, especially when you came bearing more secrets than confessions. The next several days passed in a kind of balancing act for Marcus. On one hand, he maintained his usual responsibilities at Sterling Technologies, reviewing quarterly earnings, meeting with heads of various departments, and finalizing expansions into new markets. On the other, he cultivated his new persona whenever he visited Olivia at the café or strolled by the community center. He even started taking the train more often, finding a certain freedom in being just another passenger. No one glanced at him with recognition or speculation. He had to admit this anonymity thrilled him. For the first time in years, he wasn't being sized up as the wealthy CEO, but rather greeted as an ordinary man with a battered briefcase and a thoughtful gaze. Olivia, for her part, seemed to grow more at ease around him. Their conversations lengthened in small increments, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. She shared little anecdotes about her literacy students, how Mr. Garvey could now read a simple novel to his granddaughter, or how Ms. Nguyen was tackling the basics of writing her own short stories. Each success story lit a spark in her eyes that caught Marcus off guard with its purity. One afternoon, he mustered the courage to ask, "Could I visit one of your classes sometime, just to see how you run things?" She paused, studying his expression. "You really want to?" "Absolutely," he replied with a nod. "I'm interested in how adult education works in a community setting. Maybe I could volunteer, help with some finance lessons or budgeting tips." Her face brightened. "That would be amazing. We do have a session tomorrow evening. It might be a bit crowded, but extra help is always welcome. You sure you can spare the time?" Marcus had a slate of meetings the next day, but he refused to let them derail this chance. "I'll make time." That next evening, he showed up at the Riverside Community Center a few minutes early. The building's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as he found the classroom Olivia had mentioned. Rows of simple chairs faced a whiteboard where she had already written out the night's lesson. Reading for comprehension, short stories. A small group of adults, ranging in age from early 30s to late 60s, trickled in. They greeted Olivia warmly, some calling her by first name, others addressing her as Miss Foster. She introduced Marcus as a friend who's also a teacher. He detected a slight blush in her cheeks when she used the word friend, and his own heart skipped a beat. He wondered if she felt the same cautious yet growing bond. The class began with a brief reading session, Olivia distributing photocopied pages of a short story. Marcus walked among the desks, offering gentle assistance to those who stumbled on words. He was struck by how determined the students were, how each syllable required focus and courage. Their smiles at small victories Correctly pronouncing a tricky word or grasping the meaning of a sentence reminded him of the intangible rewards of teaching, something no corporate deal could replicate. At one point, a student named Carla, a middle-aged woman with a neat braid down her back, asked Marcus, "So, you're a finance teacher. Could you explain how credit cards work someday? I always get confused about interest." Marcus shot Olivia a questioning glance, and she grinned in encouragement. "Of course," he told Carla. "I'd love to. Next time, maybe we'll do a mini-session on basic budgeting and credit." A chorus of nods and murmurs of agreement rippled through the small crowd. Marcus felt a surge of fulfillment he rarely encountered in his boardroom dealings. This was real, tangible progress, helping people navigate everyday challenges rather than driving profits or appeasing shareholders. When the session ended, the students expressed their thanks, some clapping Marcus on the shoulder. Olivia began tidying up the room, gathering papers and worn textbooks. As he helped stack chairs, the overhead lights flickered slightly. Rain had started outside, pattering against the windows. "You were great," Olivia said softly, turning to Marcus. "They really took to you." He shrugged modestly. "They're the ones doing the hard work. I just answered a few questions." She tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Honestly, this is the first time I've seen them so engaged with anything financial. Maybe it's your teaching style, or maybe just your enthusiasm." Their eyes met for a moment, the closeness electrifying. Marcus felt words rising in his throat, things he wanted to confess about who he was and why he was there. Yet the weight of his secret held him back. He reminded himself of the vow he'd made, to remain low-key until he could truly trust Olivia's intentions. Clearing his throat, he asked, "Are you heading home now?" She nodded. "In a few minutes. I usually stay to chat with anyone who needs extra help or just some support." He admired how she gave every ounce of her energy to these classes. "And Mrs. Baker, does she still live with you? Or do you live with her?" The question sounded awkward, but it was something he'd been curious about since she first mentioned it. Olivia offered a gentle smile. "We share an apartment, technically under her name. I pay most of the bills now. She's like family to me, in a way." Marcus felt another wave of respect. This woman didn't just clock in and clock out. She gave her heart and resources to anyone in need. And yet, part of him couldn't help but think, if she knew I could pay for all of this in one stroke, would she still value me in the same way? "I'll walk you out," he said, gathering the last of the materials. Together, they stepped into the hallway, the hum of leftover conversation trailing behind them. Rain drummed on the roof. This was his new normal, juggling the role of a modest teacher by night, while by day he remained the powerful, guarded CEO. For the first time, he didn't find it exhausting. Rather, he discovered a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. Yet as they reached the entrance, Marcus caught a glimpse of his reflection in the glass door, his tailored but casual clothes, his carefully nurtured facade. A stark reminder that he was straddling two worlds. Sooner or later, he would have to choose one, or find a way to merge them without shattering Olivia's trust. A week after his first volunteer session, Marcus was already a familiar figure in the literacy classroom. He began holding brief, informal workshops on personal finance, explaining credit scores or simple ways to budget. The students approached him eagerly, grateful for down-to-earth guidance. He sensed their trust growing, which only compounded the guilt nibbling at his conscience. One evening, as he wrapped up a lesson, a gruff voice called out from the doorway, "Hey, mind if I sit in next time?" Marcus turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man leaning against the frame. He looked to be in his 50s, with silver in his hair and a quiet intensity about him. Olivia's face lit up. "Hank, of course you can. I didn't know you were interested." Hank Miller, Marcus recalled Olivia mentioning him once or twice as a longtime friend of the community center. He was a veteran who'd been through multiple deployments, now working part-time security. With a nod of thanks, Hank stepped in, crossing his arms. "I've been thinking," he muttered, shifting his weight. "A lot of folks can't figure out the financial system, including me. I can handle most tasks, but credit card statements, loans, that's another beast." Marcus extended a friendly hand. "I'd be happy to help. Name's Marcus." Hank eyed him for a moment before shaking his hand. "Heard about you, the new volunteer teacher. Glad to have you around." After the students left, Hank lingered with Marcus and Olivia, chatting about the challenges veterans face when they return home. Finding stable work, managing disability payments, dealing with post-traumatic stress. Marcus listened with genuine empathy, touched by Hank's candor. Meanwhile, Stella Hopkins, a cheerful woman in her early 50s who volunteered at the center's front desk, joined them with a tray of leftover pastries from a local bakery donation. She offered them around, beaming at Marcus. "We appreciate your help, dear. I can't tell you how much you've already done to motivate people here." Marcus felt warmth spread through him. "I'm honored to be part of it." Olivia smiled at their camaraderie. "You see, we're practically a family here. Even if the building's not much, the people make it feel like home." Hank grunted in agreement. "Still, we could use more resources, fix up some leaky ceilings, get new desks. Stella's been complaining about the broken heater in her reception area. Won't be pleasant when winter hits full force." A pang of longing shot through Marcus again. If only he could offer a simple solution, money, or a connection to a wealthy donor. But that would mean blowing his cover. Instead, he forced a smile. "Maybe we can organize a fundraiser or apply for community grants." Stella brightened, nodding eagerly. "That's a good idea." Hank rubbed his chin. "Sure, if you know how to navigate that stuff. Lots of paperwork and red tape, though Olivia's been trying." Olivia shrugged modestly. "I've applied for a few small grants. We'll see what happens." As they chatted, Marcus realized these new allies, Hank, Stella, the students, were the kind of people he'd rarely interacted with as CEO. Their struggles were real, their victories small but significant, and despite coming from different walks of life, they accepted him readily, no questions asked. It touched him more deeply than he cared to admit. Eventually, they locked up the classroom. Olivia and Stella left together, engrossed in conversation about future lessons. Hank lingered with Marcus in the hallway, casting him a sidelong glance. "Let me ask you something," Hank began. "You come across as well-educated, well-spoken. How'd you end up volunteering here? Not that we're not grateful, it's just unusual." Marcus steadied himself. "I believe in helping people find empowerment through education. And sometimes I just need a break from the usual grind." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full story either. Hank nodded, seeming satisfied. "All right, fair enough. If you ever need anything around here, like if somebody gives you trouble, let me know. I keep an eye on this place, make sure everyone stays safe." "Thanks, Hank. I appreciate that." They parted ways in the parking lot. As Marcus approached his car, an older, modest sedan he'd purchased specifically for blending in, he paused to look back at the community center's dimly lit entrance. He'd gained unexpected allies, people who seemed genuinely good. The difference between them and many in his corporate circle was striking. There was no angle, no hustle for his money or influence. They just valued him for what he could offer in knowledge and kindness. Sitting behind the wheel, he wondered how long he could maintain this dual existence. With each new friend he made, the potential fallout of his deception grew. When the truth eventually emerged about his real identity, his fortune, his reasons for coming here, would they still see him the same way? He started the engine, the dashboard lights reflecting off his tense features. One thing was sure, this sense of belonging he felt was as fragile as glass. And for the first time in years, he cared desperately about not shattering it. Late one afternoon, Marcus arrived at the cafe to find an unusual tension in the air. A group of customers stood near the entrance, their faces drawn, and Olivia was speaking to a man in a rumpled jacket. The man's tone rose, sharp and angry. "I've been waiting 15 minutes, the customer snapped. "This place has gone downhill. Where's my latte?" "Where's the service around here?" Olivia, visibly stressed, tried to calm him. "I'm so sorry, sir. We're short-staffed today. I'll get your order right away." Marcus felt a surge of protectiveness. Normally, Olivia would handle any difficult customer with patience and kindness, but this man seemed more than just impatient. There was an edge of aggression in his voice. Stepping forward, Marcus gently placed a hand on Olivia's shoulder. "Is there something I can do to help?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. The man rounded on him, sneering. "Who are you supposed to be, her boyfriend? Stay out of this, buddy." Marcus clenched his jaw. The last thing he wanted was to escalate the situation, but he couldn't stand by while Olivia was being verbally attacked. "I'm just a concerned friend. Perhaps we can sort this out calmly." The man scoffed, crossing his arms. "Don't talk to me about calm. I've been ignored for ages. This is ridiculous." Olivia stepped in. "Sir, I'll personally make your drink now. If you'd like a pastry, it's on the house." That didn't seem to appease him. He pointed a finger at Olivia. "You think a free muffin solves it? You better remember customers keep you in business. You don't serve me right. I'll see to it this cafe's reputation goes down the drain." Something about his words and demeanor felt off, like he was itching for a bigger fight. Marcus gently guided Olivia back a step. "Let's take a breath. She said she's going to fix your order." "You really want to keep pushing me?" the man challenged, his voice rising. A couple of other customers glanced over warily. Marcus met his glare, maintaining a calm exterior. "No one's pushing you, sir. I'm just asking you to respect the person who's trying to assist you." The man let out a harsh laugh. "Respect, nah? Easy for you to say, dressed all nice, coming in here like you own the place." Marcus felt a flicker of recognition. Did he know this man? Something about his face felt vaguely familiar. Before he could place it, Olivia gestured for him to step aside. "Marcus, maybe just let me handle this, okay?" she pleaded softly, not wanting to escalate the scene. He took a breath, forcing his anger down. "All right," he said, stepping back. Olivia apologized again and hurried behind the counter to make the latte. The man threw Marcus one more glare before following her, arms still crossed in irritation. Marcus watched as she worked swiftly, handing over the latte with an apologetic bow of her head. The man snatched it, muttered something under his breath, and tossed a crumpled bill onto the counter without waiting for change. With one final look of contempt, he stormed out. Exhaling shakily, Olivia placed her hands on the countertop. Her co-workers exchanged worried glances, but the cafe gradually returned to its usual flow. Marcus approached quietly. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm fine. Just rattled. I hate when people get so upset, especially if we're genuinely trying." He gently touched her arm. "You handled it well." She offered a tight smile. "Thanks for trying to step in. I didn't want a scene. It's just, sometimes I see customers like that, and it reminds me how powerless we can feel in these situations. Most are decent people, but a few can be so unreasonable." Marcus finished for her. She sighed. "Exactly. Anyway, I'm sorry you had to see that." He shook his head. "Don't apologize. I'm the one sorry you had to deal with him." The rest of the afternoon was subdued, with Olivia returning to her tasks a bit shaken. Marcus lingered, quietly helping wipe down tables when the crowd thinned. At one point, he went to toss some trash in the bin and nearly bumped into Lucy, who had just entered. Lucy glanced around, sensing the tense atmosphere. "What happened here?" Marcus explained in hushed tones. Lucy frowned. "What a jerk," she said flatly. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Marcus replied, "but I can't shake the feeling I've seen that guy before. Maybe in a business context. Either way, it's done now." They both wandered near the counter, where Olivia was refilling napkin dispensers. Lucy introduced herself with a warm smile, and Olivia greeted her politely. After a few moments of small talk, Lucy excused herself, claiming she had to speak with Marcus privately. Stepping outside together, Lucy arched an eyebrow. "So that was Olivia, huh? She seems lovely and exhausted. This job is tough." Marcus nodded, glancing back through the cafe's window. Olivia chatted with a co-worker, but her shoulders looked tense. "Yeah, she is. And she's dealing with more than just this job." Lucy studied him for a moment. "You really like her, don't you?" He shifted, staring down at the sidewalk. "Yes, more than I expected." "Then maybe it's time to be honest with her," Lucy urged gently. "These situations, like that rude customer, are bound to keep popping up. She might appreciate knowing the real you standing by her side." Marcus's gut twisted. He recalled Howard's warning about secrets, but the fear of repeating old scars still loomed. I don't know if I'm ready." Lucy laid a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Just be careful. The longer you wait, the harder it'll be if she feels betrayed." He nodded, feeling the first real stirrings of panic. Inside the cafe, Olivia turned and smiled faintly through the window. He lifted his hand in a gentle wave, stomach churning with guilt. His ruse was testing his moral boundaries, forcing him to confront not only external conflicts, but also the conflict within himself. How far would he go to protect his heart? Watching Olivia in that moment, he wondered if the confrontation he most dreaded was not with a rude customer or a suspicious acquaintance, but with the truth he kept buried, and whether this fragile, blossoming connection could survive once the truth finally came to light. Marcus Sterling stood in the quiet hallway of the Riverside Community Center, balancing a cardboard box filled with fresh teaching materials under one arm. He decided to bring in extra supplies, basic workbooks, old laptops he had refurbished, hoping to bolster Olivia's literacy classes. A few days earlier, he'd been scanning through clearance sales and second-hand offerings, carefully avoiding any lavish expenditures that might raise suspicion about his wealth. This approach felt strangely rewarding. He was contributing without revealing his entire truth. As he walked into the designated classroom, Olivia and Stella were preparing for the evening session. Stella greeted him with her usual sunny smile. "Marcus, so good to see you. What have you got there?" He set down the box on a table. "Some budget-friendly tablets and workbooks. I thought it could help students practice reading apps or writing exercises." Olivia's eyes lit up, reflecting genuine gratitude. "That's incredible. You didn't have to go to so much trouble." She rummaged through the box, pulling out a workbook with a colorful cover. "These look perfect. Thank you, Marcus." He shrugged off her thanks. "Really? It's nothing. I just found a good deal online." Class began soon after. Marcus assisted a group of students who were trying out the basic word processors on the refurbished tablets. As they typed out short sentences introducing themselves, describing their week, he moved between desks, offering gentle corrections. Meanwhile, Olivia led another group through reading comprehension, highlighting key words on the whiteboard with her usual calm enthusiasm. There was a palpable buzz of achievement in the air. Ekala, the woman who'd once asked Marcus for help understanding credit cards, proudly showed him her typed paragraph with minimal spelling errors. Mr. Garvey, newly confident in his reading skills, whispered that he was finally able to navigate the bus schedule on his own. These small victories were the kind that never made headlines or soared stock prices. Yet in witnessing them, Marcus felt a sense of fulfillment he rarely experienced in his corporate realm. He thought about the many product launches he'd orchestrated, moments that brought him accolades and financial success, but they paled in comparison to this kind of personal, transformative accomplishment. At one point, he caught Olivia watching him. She had paused her own lesson, observing him with a gentle smile that carried both admiration and curiosity. He offered a faint nod, feeling a swell of tenderness. Maybe she sensed how meaningful this was to him. When class ended, the students packed up, expressing their gratitude to both teachers. Olivia and Marcus stayed behind to tidy the room. She neatly stacked the new workbooks, while he gathered the tablets to be recharged for the next session. "So," she said, wiping down a table, "you keep surprising me, first volunteering, now bringing all these supplies." Pausing, she glanced at him. "It's like you have a secret stash of resources, or maybe a heart bigger than you let on." Marcus's chest tightened momentarily. "I just want to be useful," he replied, trying to keep his tone light. "Teaching finance felt like a good fit, and, well, I stumbled across deals for these tablets. Figured it was worth it." She smiled gently, though her gaze lingered, as if searching for something behind his words. "We're lucky to have you." Before he could respond, Hank Miller popped his head in the doorway. "Thought I'd find you two here. Just wanted to say thanks again, Marcus. My nephew's using one of those tablets tonight, practicing some reading apps Olivia recommended." "That's great," Marcus said. "Pleased. I hope it helps." Hank nodded, then glanced at his watch. "Need me to walk either of you out? Parking lot can be dark." Olivia shook her head. "I'm fine. I still have paperwork to finish up, but thanks, Hank." After the veteran left, Marcus tucked the last tablet into its box. "Do you need a ride home?" he offered. "It's late." There was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. She didn't usually accept personal favors, but after a moment she agreed. "If it's not out of your way, sure. My bus route takes forever at this hour." They walked out together, the fluorescent hallway lights flickering above them. Once outside, a brisk wind swept across the parking lot. Marcus led her to the modest sedan he'd purchased. He could almost hear Lucy's voice teasing him for trading his luxury car for a second-hand model. But it was all part of the guise. As they pulled away from the community center, Olivia settled into the passenger seat. The silence between them was comfortable, almost intimate. The city lights blurred by in a soft golden haze. "Thank you again," she said quietly, "not just for the ride, but for everything. Sometimes it feels like I'm carrying this project on my shoulders. Having someone else invest time and energy makes it feel lighter." He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, wishing he could confess the entire truth, that he wanted to do so much more, that he had the means to fix almost every leaking roof and broken heater. But that revelation came with the risk of losing her trust, and he wasn't ready for that gamble. "You're not alone, Olivia," he murmured. "We're all in this together." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher, part gratitude, part cautious warmth. In that moment, he realized just how precious these small victories were. A shared ride, a supportive gesture, a classroom full of hopeful adults. Each step drew him deeper into her world, offering him a kind of acceptance he'd long craved. Still, beneath the surface, tension simmered. The longer he let this charade continue, the greater the risk of heartbreak, for both of them. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction, choosing to believe he could maintain the balance between sincerity and deceit just a little longer. Grey clouds gathered over Boston's skyline, hinting at a storm. From the vantage point of his penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows, Marcus stared out at the city with a pensive frown. He was supposed to head to the office soon, Board meetings and investor calls waited, but his mind was elsewhere. All morning he'd wrestled with a growing sense of unease, every day spent teaching at the community center or sharing quiet conversations with Olivia pulled him further from the guarded identity he'd maintained for years. And yet he still hadn't found the courage to tell her the truth. He took a slow sip of coffee, setting the cup down on a marble side table. Memories crowded his mind. Charlotte's betrayal, Greg's manipulations, countless others who wanted him for what he could give rather than who he was. It was these experiences that had led him to masquerade as a mere financial lecturer. But now, he feared he was doing Olivia a deep disservice. A faint chime on his phone signaled a call from Lucy. He exhaled, answering quickly. "Morning, sis." "Marcus, you sound off. Everything okay?" He pinched the bridge of his nose. "I'm not sure. This lie I'm living, it's weighing on me." Lucy's voice softened. "I understand. It's been weeks now, right? You've built a bond with Olivia. Every day you don't tell her, the secret grows bigger. If she finds out from someone else—" "I know," he cut in quietly. "I keep telling myself I'll do it soon, but every time I see her, I can't bear the thought of her looking at me with betrayal." Lucy sighed. "That's the risk you took, Marcus. I tried to warn you. Maybe the question is, do you trust her enough to reveal yourself?" Trust. The word lingered, echoing in his mind. Did he trust Olivia? He thought so. She was genuine, kind-hearted. She gave so much to others without expecting anything back. So what was stopping him? He ended the call with Lucy, promising to think it through, then headed to the office. Later that day, he found himself alone in a sleek conference room after a key investor meeting. The windows offered another panoramic city view, but he felt enclosed, suffocated. The meeting had gone well. Sterling Technologies was on track to finalize a major European expansion, but Marcus barely cared. He glanced at his reflection in the glass, seeing the face of a man who had everything yet felt incomplete. His phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Hey, just confirming tomorrow's literacy session. Could you bring those extra printed handouts you mentioned? Hope you're having a good day." Her simple warmth leapt off the screen. He felt a pang in his chest. He typed back, "Of course. I'll bring them. Day's busy, but thinking of you all at the center." A wave of guilt rolled over him. He recalled the last time they spoke about personal matters. She'd lightly teased him for finding such good deals on supplies. She was curious about his background, yet she never pried. Respectful, honest. The very traits he admired were the ones he was repaying with a lie. He exited the conference room, heading into a quiet hallway. There, he passed by a framed photograph, a corporate award ceremony where he stood beside Lucy, both smiling proudly. He'd built an empire, but what was it worth if his personal life was a tangled mess of distrust? That evening, instead of returning to his penthouse, he drove to a waterfront park. Dusk was approaching, the sky streaked with orange and purple. A biting wind came off the harbor, but Marcus barely noticed. He found an empty bench and sank down, burying his hands in his coat pockets. He thought of Howard Green's warning. Secrets can destroy relationships. He remembered Lucy's caution, repeated so many times. The longer you wait, the harder it will be. And he heard the echo of Olivia's gentle voice saying, "We're lucky to have you." How would she feel once she knew the truth? Would she believe he'd only come to the center to deceive her? His thoughts swirled until he felt nearly paralyzed. The wind whipped across his face, a stinging reminder of reality. He had two choices: continue the masquerade a little longer in hopes of forging an even stronger bond, or reveal the truth now, risking her anger and heartbreak. He stared at the darkening waves. Perhaps it boiled down to trust in Olivia's character. Had she ever shown any sign of greed or opportunism? Never. Yet fear still clung to him like a stubborn shadow. Eventually, the cold drove him back to his car. As he slid into the driver's seat, he made a silent vow. Soon, very soon, he would come clean. Either he would lose her, or they'd move forward honestly. Living in this limbo had become an unbearable weight pressing down on his heart. Turning the key, he let the engine purr softly before pulling away from the curb. The city lights glowed in the distance, but he felt no comfort in their familiarity. The true battle now raged within him as he stood on the brink of either forging an authentic love or watching it crumble under the weight of his unspoken truths. A brisk knock sounded on Marcus's office door. He glanced up from his desk, where piles of paperwork threatened to topple. "Come in," he called, mentally preparing for yet another investor question or departmental query. Lucy stepped inside, shutting the door behind her. Her expression was a mix of urgency and concern. "Marcus, we need to talk." He set down his pen. "Sounds serious." She approached his desk, dropping a folder in front of him. "I got a tip from a legal acquaintance. There's a pending action to raise rents on the Riverside Community Center property. Possibly even an eviction if they can't pay the new fees." Marcus's eyes widened. Eviction? That would shut down the literacy program. Olivia's entire operation would be homeless. Lucy nodded, a grin set to her features. "Apparently, the property owners think they can make more money by repurposing the building for commercial use. They're claiming the center hasn't kept up with certain compliance measures, plumbing issues, structural repairs needed. If the center can't pay for the renovations and the increased lease, they could be forced out." His mind raced. "The center is basically run on donations. They barely have enough to cover basic maintenance." He stood, abruptly, pacing behind his desk. "I could step in. I could buy the property outright, or at least cover the costs." He broke off, remembering Olivia's suspicious that he was just a modest finance instructor. But how? Without revealing. Lucy touched his arm gently. "This is urgent. If the community center closes, those people lose their only educational resource. Olivia loses her second home. Are you really going to let your secret keep you from helping?" He rubbed his temples, tension coiling in his chest. "No, Of course I want to help, but think about what that implies. If I suddenly show up with thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, to keep the center running, how do I explain that?" The folder still lay on the desk, an ominous reminder of the situation. Lucy spoke quietly. "You could do it anonymously, but deals like this always leave a paper trail. Sooner or later, it might come out." Marcus clenched his jaw, turning to the large windows that overlooked Boston's skyline. "I have to do something, Lucy. I can't just watch them lose everything. That center means more to Olivia than she's ever let on." She nodded, sympathy evident in her eyes. "Maybe this is the push you need. The reason to come clean." He thought back to the vow he'd made at the waterfront park. Either come clean or watch everything crumble. Now, with an eviction looming, inaction wasn't an option. Yet the idea of revealing himself and risking Olivia's trust made him feel sick with apprehension. That night, after Lucy left, he stayed at the office long past sunset, gathering financial documents and scanning real estate regulations. He even considered reaching out to the current property owners through a shell company to quietly negotiate a buyout. But every scenario ended in a tangle of half-truths that could collapse with a single misstep. By the following evening, the sense of urgency had only grown. Marcus arrived at the community center, a lump in his throat. Olivia was there, patiently explaining basic grammar to a small circle of new students. He could see lines of worry etched on her face, though she kept her composure for the sake of the class. When the session ended, She pulled Marcus aside. "I just heard from the center's director. They might have to shut down if they can't raise enough funds to meet the new leasing terms. I'm terrified, Marcus. Where will these people go? Most can't afford private classes." He gently squeezed her hand, a surge of protectiveness surging through him. "We'll figure it out," he promised, hating how hollow it sounded without the full truth. "What's your plan?" "I'm trying to organize a fundraiser," she said, her voice trembling with determination. "Maybe a community fair or a raffle. I don't know. Anything to bring in money, but we need so much more than what a small bake sale can cover." Marcus swallowed hard. "We can't give up hope. Maybe there are grants or larger donors." She nodded, blinking back tears. "I'll try everything. I can't let this place close." As she turned away, he felt a jolt of urgency. This was the moment to tell her. But the words lodged in his throat. He pictured her face if he revealed he was actually a multi-millionaire who could solve this crisis in an instant. Would she feel relieved? Betrayed? He stood in the dimly lit hallway, watching her walk back toward the classroom to clean up. The threat looming over the center was large indeed, too large to handle with a simple donation or fundraiser. Yet the fear that had controlled him for so long also loomed large. For the first time, Marcus recognized that if he didn't act decisively, he risked losing Olivia for good, either because the center would vanish from her life or because she'd discover he could have helped but chose to remain hidden. And so, stepping out into the chilly night, he made a silent, painful decision. He would find a way to save the community center, even if it meant putting all his carefully constructed lies in jeopardy. The tension at the Riverside Community Center was palpable. Staff and volunteers rushed through the hallways, frantically organizing a last-minute fundraiser. Posters went up on bulletin boards advertising a community literacy fair with games, auctions, and a raffle. The date, just 2 weeks away, glared from each page in bold letters. Time was short. Marcus arrived early that day to help. He slipped into the main office, where Olivia, Stella, and Hank crowded around a battered desk piled high with forms. They barely glanced up until he cleared his throat softly. "Oh, Marcus, thank God you're here," Olivia sighed. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled into a messy ponytail. "We need more tables, more chairs, and more volunteers. We're trying to set up stalls for local artisans to sell goods, plus an area for live music, but the logistics are overwhelming." Stella chimed in. "We're also short on donations for the raffle prizes. We have maybe half a dozen gift baskets so far, not nearly enough to draw a big crowd." Marcus set down a folder of ideas he'd prepared. "I've done some research on successful community fundraisers. You need a hook, something unique to draw people in." He paused, forcing a casual tone. "I have a friend who works in event planning. Maybe he could donate time or resources." Olivia perked up a bit. "That would be wonderful. Any help is welcome." Across the desk, Hank rubbed his chin. "I'm just hoping we can raise enough to impress the property owners. They're asking for a steep sum to fix the building, plus the higher rent." "Hard to see how a single event could cover all that," Marcus swallowed, the gravity of the situation crashing in on him again. He could write a check that would solve everything, but to do so under the guise of a modest lecturer would be impossible. And so he offered a gentle nod. "Let's take it one step at a time. We'll do our best and see how the numbers come out." For the next few days, Marcus threw himself into the preparations. He used all his corporate negotiation skills to persuade local businesses to donate products or sponsor sections of the fair. He spent hours drafting flyers and working behind the scenes, determined to maximize revenue. Though he kept his net worth hidden, it felt strangely freeing to leverage his business acumen for something purely benevolent. In rare, quiet moments, he found himself alone with Olivia. She'd thank him softly, her expression a blend of gratitude and fatigue. Each time, guilt churned in his stomach. The 2-week deadline loomed like a ticking clock, not just for the center, but for his own integrity. The evening of the fair arrived in a swirl of activity. Strings of colorful lights and hand-painted banners transformed the usually drab community center courtyard into a festive scene. Tables lined the perimeter, displaying crafts, baked goods, and raffle items. A small stage stood at one end for local musicians and a short program of speeches. By 6 o'clock, families and neighbors began trickling in, exchanging laughter and curious glances at the various booths. Olivia moved among the crowd like a gracious host, greeting attendees and directing them to the raffle table. Marcus hovered near her, stepping in to help whenever she looked overwhelmed. As darkness fell, the courtyard filled with chatter. Stella sold homemade cakes. Hank supervised a small game booth, and local artisans displayed handmade jewelry and paintings. Children ran around clutching balloons. A warm buzz of community spirit filled the air, reminding Marcus that not everything in life came with a price tag. When the raffle started, Olivia took the makeshift stage, microphone in hand. Her voice trembled with emotion as she thanked everyone for their support. "No matter how much we raise tonight," she said, "we're grateful for every dollar and every volunteer hour given. This center has been a home for so many who needed help learning to read, to write, to take control of their future. I pray we can keep that going." Applause rippled through the crowd. Marcus noticed tears glistening in her eyes, and he clenched his fists by his side. "I can fix this," he told himself. "I can fix this if I just tell her who I am." But his feet stayed rooted to the ground, fear halting him like an iron chain. The raffle prizes were drawn: restaurant gift certificates, handmade quilts, small electronics. Stella and Hank tallied ticket sales, their faces uncertain. When at last they counted every dollar, they offered a subdued nod to Olivia. She stepped back to the microphone. "I want to announce the total raised tonight." She scanned the paper Stella handed her. It's more than we hoped, but still short of what we need." A hush fell over the crowd. Marcus's heart thundered. This was the moment. He could step up, reveal everything, donate the shortfall, and save the center. But as he watched Olivia's eyes roam across the audience, searching for hope, he felt paralyzed. Was it the right time? Or would it look like a manipulative stunt? At last, she closed the event with heartfelt thanks, urging people to keep praying and supporting however they could. The crowd dispersed slowly, some leaving donations at the last minute. Children waved balloons, and volunteers stacked chairs in silence. Marcus found Olivia near the stage, shoulders slumped. He rested a hand on her arm. "I'm sorry," he murmured. She sniffed, blinking away tears. "I know. We did our best." His gaze dropped to the ground, frustration and guilt gnawing at him. "We didn't do everything possible," he thought bitterly. "Not if I'm still hiding my real power to help." Yet, in her eyes, he saw no blame, only gratitude. That, more than anything, hurt, because he knew he wasn't the hero she believed him to be. If she only understood how easily he could sign a check to cover their deficit, would she still look at him with that unwavering trust? He opened his mouth, words forming on his tongue. "Olivia, there's something you should know." But the moment slipped through his fingers as a group of volunteers approached, asking for direction on cleaning up. He closed his mouth, silently cursing his own hesitation. Somewhere in the distance, a final raffle winner cheered, clutching a small basket of local goodies. Around them, the colored lights flickered. For a brief, fleeting instant, Marcus dared to imagine a future where he was free from secrets, standing beside Olivia as an equal, openly offering what he could. That glimpse of hope buoyed him, even as reality weighed him down. Because, deep inside, he knew the hardest decision still lay ahead. The morning after the literacy fair dawned grey and drizzly. matching the heaviness in Marcus's heart. He stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, noting the fatigue etched under his eyes. After a restless night, he'd resolved that something had to change. The knowledge of how easily he could save the community center gnawed at him. He couldn't continue this deception indefinitely. Olivia and the others deserved better. He arrived at Sterling Technologies, bypassing the usual greetings with staff. His assistant, Rachel, sensed his mood and kept interactions brief. In his private office, he sifted through a stack of proposals and profit statements, each promising growth and strong returns. It all felt hollow. He would have traded every glowing forecast for the chance to fix the center's crisis, free of secrets. Lucy dropped by mid-morning, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Marcus, then perched on the edge of his desk. "I take it the fundraiser didn't meet the goal." Marcus shook his head. "Not even close. They did an amazing job, but the gap is huge." Her expression softened. "I'm sorry, I know how much this means to you." He swallowed hard, staring at the coffee's rippling surface. "It's time I do something. I can't let them lose that place." Lucy's eyes flickered with relief. "So you'll reveal who you are to Olivia and make an offer? Maybe buy the property, or at least cover repairs?" "That's what I'm considering," he admitted, voice strained. "But how do I do it without her feeling manipulated or betrayed?" "You tell her the truth, from the heart," Lucy said firmly. "Explain your fears, your reasons. She might be hurt, but she'll respect honesty more than if you swoop in mysteriously." He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "It's a gamble, but I don't see another way." That afternoon he called Howard Green for advice. The old professor's soothing tone crackled through the phone. "The question isn't whether or not to take a risk, Marcus. It's whether you can live with yourself if you don't." Marcus leaned back in his office chair, letting Howard's words sink in. Living with inaction was no longer an option. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "I'll talk to her tonight." With a new sense of purpose, he finished his workday and headed straight to the community center. The rain had eased to a drizzle by the time he found parking. Inside, he spotted Olivia hunched over a desk, flipping through financial papers with Stella and Hank. Her face looked drawn, worry deepening the lines on her forehead. He approached, throat tight. "Hey, mind if we talk?" Hank and Stella exchanged glances, then discreetly stepped away. Olivia stood, clutching a sheet of figures to her chest. "Of course," she said softly, guiding him to an empty corner of the hallway. "What's going on?" she asked, voice tinged with fatigue. "We're trying to see if there's a last-ditch grant we can apply for, but it's not looking good." Marcus inhaled. This was it, the moment he'd rehearsed a dozen times in his mind. "Olivia, there's something I need to tell you about me, and about how I might be able to help." She studied his face, concern flickering in her eyes. "Okay." Every muscle in his body tensed. Then, just as he began to speak, Hank strode up, out of breath. "Guys, you need to see this. The property owners sent an official notice. They're giving us 30 days to vacate if we can't meet their terms." Olivia's face went pale. 30 days? She took the document from Hank, scanning it with trembling hands. "They can't do this on such short notice. It's hardly enough time to relocate or raise the funds." Marcus looked over her shoulder at the legal language. It was every bit as dire as Lucy's warning suggested. The owners were citing safety hazards and overdue repairs. If the center couldn't comply within a month, out they'd go. He felt a surge of determination. "Olivia," he said softly, pulling her a step away from Hank, "I'm sorry to see this. There's something you should know." But her eyes filled with tears, her usually steady voice shaking. "I don't understand how people can be so cruel. This center isn't a money-making scheme. It's a lifeline for the community." She looked so heartbroken that Marcus's words lodged in his throat again. Would this announcement overshadow any confession he made, or would it make his timing feel opportunistic? "Olivia," he began again, but she brushed away a tear, inadvertently placing a hand on his arm. "Marcus, you've done so much already. I don't expect you to fix everything. But I don't know what we're going to do." A rush of protectiveness welled inside him. He carefully wrapped an arm around her shoulders, offering what little comfort he could. Despite his own turmoil, he recognized her immediate crisis. There were volunteers, students, and staff members who might lose everything if the center shut down. He took a shaky breath. "I promise I won't let this happen," he said, voice low but firm. "We'll find a way," she nodded, eyes brimming. At that moment, Hank reappeared with a set of architectural repair estimates, his tone grim. They fell into urgent discussion, focusing on short-term strategies. Marcus stayed close to Olivia, occasionally meeting her gaze with the silent vow that he would step in somehow. Yet as the conversation went on, that small window to reveal his identity slipped shut again. The pressing reality of the eviction overshadowed everything else, including his confession. He sensed the time was near when he'd have no choice but to act, even if it cost him her trust. At the night's end, the group parted ways, vowing to reconvene in the morning. Olivia lingered, hugging him briefly as she whispered her gratitude for his support. Her warmth cut him to the core, reminding him of the heavy truth he still withheld. Stepping into the rainy Boston night, Marcus clenched his fists at his sides, frustration boiling. He was hurtling toward a breaking point, a place where he could no longer hide who he was if he wanted to save Olivia's cause. His heart pounded with the realization that everything he feared, rejection, betrayal, heartbreak, was about to collide with the love and moral conviction he felt for her. And soon, there would be no more delaying the truth. A cold drizzle washed over Boston as Marcus pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside Community Center. The sky hung low and gray, reflecting the unease in his chest. He knew, deep down, that this was the night. If he didn't speak now, the lies he'd built around himself would become insurmountable. Lucy had called him that afternoon, sensing his turmoil. "It's time," she'd said in her calm, measured tone. "You've done all you can behind the scenes. If you want any real trust, you have to show her the truth." Shutting off the engine, Marcus steeled himself. The battered sedan he'd been driving to maintain a facade suddenly felt claustrophobic, and he welcomed the cool rain when he finally stepped outside. The overhead lighting flickered as he walked to the community center's entrance, casting shifting shadows on the damp pavement. Inside, Olivia was gathering a few stray books from a table in the hallway. Her face brightened momentarily when she saw him, though that flicker of hope quickly gave way to the familiar fatigue he'd grown to recognize. "You're here late," she said softly. He nodded, removing his rain-spotted jacket. "I needed to talk to you, privately." A hint of worry creased her brow. "Is it about the center?" "In a way," he murmured. "Could we maybe step into one of the classrooms where it's quiet?" She led him to the small room where they usually held the adult literacy sessions. The overhead fluorescent buzzed faintly, and the walls bore taped-up posters of basic grammar rules and reading strategies. Marcus swallowed hard, noting how ordinary the setting looked and how extraordinary his confession would be. "What's on your mind?" she asked, setting the books aside. He could see shadows of concern in her eyes, as if she sensed the gravity of his mood. Marcus took a steadying breath. "I've been keeping something from you, from everyone here, and I'm sorry." Olivia's gaze flickered with alarm, but she held his stare. "All right," she said quietly, folding her arms. "Go on." He pressed his lips together, trying to organize the thousands of thoughts swirling in his brain. I'm not just a finance instructor or part-time professor. I mean, I do lecture sometimes, but that's not who I am, not really. She tilted her head, confusion knotted in her features. I don't understand. He felt his heart hammering. My name is Marcus Sterling. I run Sterling Technologies. The silence that followed was deafening. Her eyes widened, and she took a half-step back. Sterling, as in the software and tech giant. He nodded, a flush creeping up his neck. I've built it over the past decade. That's where my real money comes from. I'm not some middle-class guy who just gets by. I came here under false pretenses because I've been hurt in the past by people who only wanted me for my fortune. She didn't speak, and the pause stretched out thick with tension. Finally, she pressed a hand to her temple. Why would you hide that from me? From all of us. I was terrified you'd treat me differently, or that I'd never know if you genuinely cared. Marcus swallowed, feeling a twinge of shame. I've met too many people who see dollar signs when they look at me. And you seemed so real, so kind. I didn't want to lose that. Olivia lowered her hand, her lips pursed in disbelief. So you lied. For weeks. He reached out, but she stepped away. I never meant to hurt you. I was just scared. A tremor passed over her face, a mix of anger and something else he couldn't name. All this time, you've watched us struggle to save the center, and you have the resources to fix it. Did you realize how that might feel to me, to everyone here? The floodgates opened inside him. I'm sorry, he repeated, voice cracking. I wanted to help, but every time I thought about stepping in, I froze, because I knew I'd have to tell you the truth. And I didn't want you to see me as just another rich guy. She stood there, breathing hard. He braced for an outburst, a wave of betrayal. Instead, she let out a shaky sigh. Marcus, it's not that I'm furious about your wealth, or even that you kept it secret. Her voice choked off. It's that you didn't trust me enough to be honest. His stomach twisted. He hadn't expected her pain to feel like such a punch in the gut. I do trust you, he insisted, though the words sounded hollow even to him. She shook her head, tears brightening her eyes. No, you trusted your fear more, and that's what hurts most. She wiped at a tear, turning away. I can't talk about this now. I need space to process. Marcus watched her walk out, each footstep echoing like a hammer blow against his chest. He longed to run after her, to promise he'd do anything to make it right. But his own guilt kept him rooted to the spot, staring at the battered desks and laminated learning charts that symbolized the honesty and dedication he admired in her. Only after her footsteps faded did he allow himself to slump into a chair, head in his hands. His worst nightmare was coming true. The person he cared about most felt betrayed, and he had no one to blame but himself. Outside, the rain intensified, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Marcus closed his eyes, realizing with a heavy heart that the hard part had only just begun. The next day dragged by in a haze. Marcus arrived at Sterling Technologies and tried to focus on quarterly reports, but every chart and spreadsheet blurred under the weight of his thoughts. He left early, claiming he was feeling unwell, and headed home to his penthouse, now a place that felt eerily hollow. He found himself pacing the living room, gazing at the view of Boston through rain-streaked glass. Memories of Olivia's stricken face replayed in his mind. She hadn't yelled or accused him of malice. She'd simply looked wounded. He couldn't decide which reaction hurt more. Lucy arrived that evening, letting herself in with the spare key. When she saw him slumped on the couch, she offered a sympathetic smile. "You did it, then?" "You told her," he nodded, voice strained. "She walked out, didn't want to talk anymore. I can't say I blame her." Lucy set her purse aside and took a seat across from him. Give her time. You dropped a huge revelation on her. She might need space to decide how she really feels. He rubbed a hand over his eyes. I just want to fix it. But how do I show her I'm not like those people who used me? I've become what I despised, someone who lies for his own benefit. Lucy leaned forward. Marcus, you did it out of fear, not greed. She may come to understand that, but there's another complication. She paused, seeming uncertain how to proceed. What else could possibly be more complicated? He asked, a note of bitterness creeping into his tone. Lucy hesitated. I did some digging, reviewing old legal documents. Dad's name kept popping up in connection with properties. Remember that scandal years ago when he defaulted on certain obligations? People lost their jobs, their homes. Turns out, one of those impacted might have been... He tensed, a terrible sense of foreboding gripping him. Might have been... Who, Lucy? She took a breath. Robert Foster, Olivia's father. Marcus froze. Her father was... Wait, are you saying Dad's deals left her family destitute? Lucy nodded grimly. It appears that Robert was part of a group of employees who lost their pensions when Dad sold off a manufacturing wing. He apparently sank into debt and faced foreclosure shortly after. Shock pounded in Marcus's ears, followed by a wave of nausea. My God, did she know about this? Lucy pursed her lips. I can't be sure. But if she recognized your name from the start, maybe that's why she was cautious. He shot up from the couch, pacing toward the window. Rain glowed under streetlights like silver threads. That might explain so much. Why she never asked personal questions about my past. Why she seemed guarded herself. Lucy stood, crossing her arms. It's not your fault what Dad did. But if her family was hurt by him, she might worry you'd be no different. And your deception hasn't helped ease that concern. Marcus's mind reeled. Just when he thought he'd finally been honest, another layer of secrets threatened to crush any hope of reconciliation. I have to see her, he said, spinning to face Lucy. I need to find out if this is true, and if she's known all along. Lucy set a hand on his shoulder. Calm down, Marcus. Don't barge in demanding answers. Talk to her gently. Yet talk proved harder than he expected. Olivia dodged his calls. She didn't answer texts. At the community center, Hank and Stella politely informed him she was taking a few days off to sort through personal matters. A knot of dread coiled in his stomach. She must know. She must have known everything from the start. The possibility churned in his mind. She might have recognized him but kept a distance for her own reasons. Could she have cared for him genuinely? Or had she always feared he was another Sterling who would destroy her life? On the third day, an unfamiliar number flashed on his phone. Hoping desperately it was Olivia, he answered with a shaky, "Hello." "Marcus," came a calm female voice. "It's Stella Hopkins, from the center." Relief washed over him, though not entirely. "Stella, hi. Is Olivia okay?" A brief pause. She's working through some things. She asked me not to give her address to you, but she did say you could come by my place if you want to talk." Marcus frowned in confusion. "Talk to you?" "Yes, there's something you need to understand about her family. If I didn't believe it was crucial, I wouldn't get involved." A flicker of hope ignited in Marcus's chest, tempered by apprehension. "I'll come right away. Text me the address." Stella did, and Marcus wasted no time heading out. Rain still drizzled as he drove through a quiet neighborhood on the city's outskirts. He found Stella waiting on the porch of a modest single-story home with warm light in the windows. She led him inside, offering tea in a cramped living room decorated with crocheted blankets and framed photos of smiling relatives. Once they both settled, Stella folded her hands in her lap. "Marcus, Olivia told me you admitted your real identity. She's conflicted, upset, understandably so. But that's only half the story. He nodded tightly. Lucy found records about my father's involvement in Robert Foster's financial downfall. Is that what this is about? Stella exhaled, glancing at her own reflection in a nearby mirror. Olivia asked me not to share every detail, but I think you deserve to know the basics. Robert was a proud man who'd worked for your father's company for years. When the layoffs came, he lost his pension. It spiraled from there. He lost his home and fell into a depression he never fully recovered from. Marcus closed his eyes, the guilt almost overwhelming. I had no idea. That's just it, Stella said softly. Olivia has carried that burden for a long time, worried that her father's bitterness toward the sterling name would define her life. So when she recognized you, yes, from business magazines, she told me she tried to keep her distance. But then you showed up regularly, and she saw how different you seemed. She didn't know what to believe. Marcus ran a hand over his face, absorbing the blow. So she knew I was lying to her about not being wealthy. But she also had a reason not to trust my family. Stella reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Olivia cares for you, Marcus. She wouldn't be this hurt if she didn't, but understanding her father's pain is key. She's torn between what she's seen in you and the damage your father caused. He nodded, eyes burning. I have to make it right. For her, for the center, somehow. Stella offered a sympathetic smile. Give her time, and when she's ready to talk, meet her where she is, in truth, with no more secrets. Marcus rose, clasping Stella's hand gratefully. Thank you for telling me. I swear I'll do everything in my power to help her, to help the center, and to make amends for what my father did. Stepping back into the rain-swept driveway, he breathed in the damp air. His path forward was clearer now, though far from simple. He needed Olivia to see that he wasn't Horace Sterling, that he wasn't the man who had ruined her father's life. And if he failed to prove it, he feared he would lose her forever. 2 more days passed before Olivia reached out. The message came late in the evening, just as Marcus was preparing for bed. Meet me at the community center tomorrow, after hours. I think we need to talk. Marcus's heart hammered so loudly he could barely type a reply. I'll be there, whatever time you say. All night he tossed and turned, imagining every possible turn the conversation could take. Would she lash out at him? Demand he undo his father's wrongs? Or would she give him a chance to show that he'd never meant to continue the sterling legacy of callous business deals? He arrived the next evening, just before closing. Most of the staff had gone home, and the building stood quiet under dim hallway lights. Olivia waited in one of the small offices, perched on the edge of a battered desk. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. Dark circles underlined her eyes, betraying the emotional toll of the past days. Marcus stepped inside, inhaling sharply. Hi. She nodded, motioning for him to close the door. He did, and they stood facing each other, the silence thick. I talked to Stella, she began. I know you know about my father's history with the Sterling family. He spread his hands in a pleading gesture. Olivia, I swear I had no idea. I was young when my father made those decisions. I didn't learn about the damage until Lucy investigated. She studied him, her expression a complex mix of anger, sadness, and something else, perhaps yearning for closure. My father never fully recovered from that financial blow. He lost his job, his home, and a lot of his dignity. Mom and I tried to support him, but the resentment built up. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. I'm so sorry. I wish I could change the past. I can't, but I want to do better. Let me prove that. She gazed down at her hands. You hurt me, Marcus, by lying about who you are. But at the same time, I can't ignore how you've helped the center, how you've treated everyone with kindness these past weeks, before I even suspected you were a sterling. And you took interest in my literacy program because you truly care." There was a tremor in her voice, and he dared step closer. "I do care, not just about the center, but about you. You mean more to me than I ever expected." She bit her lip, eyes glistening. "I kept my distance at first because of your surname, but you seemed different. And it scared me to imagine that I might be drawn to the son of the man who cost my father everything." A pulse of hope thrummed in Marcus's veins. "I'm not my father. I never want to repeat his mistakes. I'm willing to prove it. Financially, ethically, whatever it takes." Olivia exhaled, as if shedding a heavy load. "Part of me wants to trust you, but I'm still dealing with the hurt. You deceived me, and it makes me wonder what else might be hidden." He reached out tentatively, brushing his fingertips against hers. When she didn't pull away, he felt a flicker of relief. "No more secrets," he promised. "Ask me anything, and I'll answer truthfully. My life is an open book." She searched his face. "The center is about to lose its lease. If you have the means, why haven't you already stepped in to save it?" He swallowed, guilt returning. "Because I knew that the second I did, I'd have to explain how I could afford it. I was too much of a coward to face your questions." She nodded, eyes brimming with tears. "And that hesitation nearly cost us everything." Marcus gently laced his fingers with hers, that small point of contact enough to make his heart stutter. "I'm done hesitating. If you'll let me, I want to help. Let me invest in the center, publicly if need be. I'll ensure the repairs are done, the rent is paid. In return, I just ask for your forgiveness, or at least a chance to earn it." Her lips trembled. "I need time to see this is genuine. But I won't stand in your way if you want to contribute. We'd be foolish to reject funding now." His chest tightened with a mixture of relief and regret. "Thank you." She released a shaky breath, tears trailing down her cheeks. "I'm not promising anything else, Marcus. We have a lot to work through, both of us, but let's start by saving this center." He nodded, gently squeezing her hand before letting go. "Whatever you need, I'm here." For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the tension still palpable but threaded with a fragile new hope. Marcus realized that healing old wounds wouldn't happen overnight, yet this was a start, a delicate, tremulous bridge that might one day lead them back to each other, stronger and more honest than before. Barely 24 hours after that conversation, Marcus found himself seated in a cramped conference room at a local law firm, facing the property owners of the Riverside Community Center. Lucy sat beside him, looking every inch the poised attorney. On the opposite side of the long wooden table, two men in suits eyed Marcus with curiosity and mild skepticism, flipping through documents that spelled out his surprise proposal. He had made a bold move, offering to purchase the property outright through a legitimate trust and commit to funding the necessary repairs, as well as stabilizing the rent for the community center. It was a multi-million-dollar arrangement that seemed to stun everyone involved. Lucy cleared her throat, breaking the tense silence. "My client, Mr. Sterling, is prepared to finalize this deal as soon as possible. He's made it clear that saving the community center is his top priority." One of the property owners, a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses, frowned. "Why the sudden interest? Last month, the center could barely scrape together rent. Now you're stepping in like a guardian angel." Marcus leaned forward, hands folded. "I believe in what the center does. I'm also aware they're in danger of eviction. This arrangement ensures they can continue their programs while allowing you to sell at a fair profit." The second man, younger and more shrewd-looking, tapped a pen against his notepad. "It's unusual. But we're not opposed to a lucrative deal. We just want to make sure all the legalities line up. Lucy slid a binder toward them. Everything is detailed here. The purchase price, the commitment to repairs, and the new lease agreement that locks in a manageable rent for the center. Mr. Sterling is capable of closing quickly. Marcus swallowed, remembering Olivia's guarded expression when he'd mentioned this plan the night before. She'd supported it, but he could see the conflict in her eyes, gratitude for the rescue, and lingering hurt over his previous deceptions. He forced himself to refocus on the men across the table. Time is crucial, he said. The community center only has a month before forced eviction. If we move fast, no one has to relocate, and you get a clean sale. After a few more questions and a round of cautious nods, the property owners stood up to confer in private. Marcus exhaled, raking a hand through his hair. Lucy gave him a small, encouraging smile. "You're doing the right thing, you know." He nodded, though doubt still gnawed at him. "I just hope Olivia can see this as sincerity, not manipulation. I can't deny how abrupt it looks." Lucy patted his arm gently. "She knows the crisis is real, and she's aware you could have kept hiding. Instead, you're stepping forward publicly, risking your secret. That counts for something." The property owners returned after a short deliberation. The older man cleared his throat. "We're inclined to accept your offer, Mr. Sterling. It's generous. Our lawyer will finalize the contract by next week. We'll need you to wire an earnest payment by tomorrow." Marcus shook their hands. Relief mingled with the weight of responsibility. "I'll transfer the funds immediately." Lucy handled the formalities, and an hour later, they left the law firm with a signed draft agreement in hand. Marcus stared at the document, adrenaline still coursing through him. "I'm buying an entire property to save the center." The magnitude of it sank in, yet he felt a strange calm. That afternoon, he called a meeting at the community center, inviting Olivia, Hank, Stella, and a few other key volunteers. They gathered in a small office, tension hovering in the air. Olivia sat on the edge of a desk, arms folded protectively. Marcus cleared his throat. "I wanted to share some important news. I've negotiated with the owners to purchase this property. Pending final paperwork, we'll be able to do the repairs, keep the center open, and set a stable rent." A stunned silence fell. Hank's eyes widened. Stella gasped. Another volunteer, a young mother named Joanne, covered her mouth in disbelief. Olivia looked down, her posture rigid. "You're buying it outright?" "Yes," Marcus confirmed gently. "You'll have all the space you need, plus the security of knowing it can't be sold out from under you again." Hank recovered first, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. "Well, I'll be damned. You just saved a lot of folks from losing a vital resource." Stella blinked back tears. "I don't even know what to say." All eyes shifted to Olivia, waiting for her reaction. She finally lifted her gaze to Marcus, and in that moment he saw gratitude, confusion, and a flicker of unresolved hurt. "Thank you," she said quietly, "on behalf of everyone here." He gave a small nod. "I only hope you'll see that this is about more than money for me." She pressed her lips together, then stood. "Maybe we can discuss the details and come up with a plan for the renovations. There's a lot we've been wanting to fix up. Heating, plumbing, classroom expansions." It was a pragmatic response, but he detected a slight tremor in her voice. If the others noticed, they didn't comment. They launched into a flurry of ideas about improvements, from better lighting in the hallways to installing ramps for better accessibility. Marcus jotted notes, trying to keep up. In the midst of this hopeful brainstorming, he noticed Olivia retreat to a corner. Her arms crossed over her chest. She watched the excitement with a vacant stare. It was almost as if she couldn't allow herself to celebrate yet. Eventually, the meeting wrapped up. Stella and Hank left, each thanking Marcus profusely. He returned their smiles, but his attention lingered on Olivia. She'd remained behind, tidying up some papers. When the room emptied, he approached her softly. "Hey, are you okay?" She looked up, a mix of emotions flickering across her face. "I'm relieved for the center, but I can't just forget the hurt, you know?" He nodded, heart sinking. "I understand. I'm not expecting you to. I only want you to know I'm willing to do what it takes, for as long as it takes, to earn back your trust." She attempted a tight smile. "Let's focus on fixing the center first." "That's something concrete we can work on." He nodded, sensing that was all the opening she could give him right now. "Then let's do it," he whispered, stepping back to give her space. As they parted ways, Marcus felt the strange blend of triumph and heartache. The community center was on the path to being saved, an undeniable victory. Yet his relationship with Olivia remained suspended in uneasy limbo. There was no quick fix for the broken trust between them. Still, for the first time, he carried hope that maybe, just maybe, their shared commitment to helping others could pave the way for healing the wounds between them. Over the next few days, the purchase agreement moved swiftly. Lucy facilitated the legal documentation, and Marcus transferred the funds for the earnest payment. Contractors were scheduled to inspect the community center for immediate repairs. Local news outlets caught wind of the story, a wealthy philanthropist stepping in to preserve a vital neighborhood resource, and requests for interviews trickled in. Marcus, however, politely declined most interview requests. Not wanting to turn the center's plight into a media spectacle, he focused on the actual work, budgets for renovations, coordinating with Hank to address security upgrades, and reviewing architectural plans with Stella for a small library expansion. Through it all, Olivia maintained a professional demeanor, polite yet distant. She thanked him for every step taken, but her smiles never reached her eyes. Marcus sensed a quiet storm roiling beneath her calm surface. He longed to break through, but each time he tried, she'd shift the subject back to logistics or politely excuse herself. Finally, on a late afternoon when the center was mostly empty, he found her alone in what would become a new reading room. She stood by a window, sunlight catching the strands of her hair. In her hands, she held a file of old photographs, a few tacked to the wall for possible decoration once the room was refurbished. "Hey," Marcus greeted softly, stepping into the room. She turned, hugging the file protectively. "Hi." He noticed a faded photo in her hand. A younger man, beaming with pride in front of a modest suburban house. Marcus guessed it was Robert Foster. "Your father?" She nodded, offering the photo for him to see. This was before everything fell apart. He had just gotten promoted at your father's company. Her voice trembled, but she steadied it. "We were so happy back then." He truly believed in the American dream, hard work, loyalty, and all that. Marcus swallowed, staring at the photo. "I wish I could change what happened." She retrieved the picture, slipping it gently into the file. He was never the same after losing his pension. The bitterness ate away at him. It changed our family dynamic. I promised myself I'd help people who'd been let down by society, especially adults who never got a fair chance at education. That's why I do what I do now. A beat of silence passed, then she fixed him with a level gaze. "Marcus, I know you're not personally responsible for Dad's actions, but that name, Sterling, it's carried pain in my life for years. When I saw you in the cafe, I recognized you from an interview in a business magazine." His breath caught. "So you knew from the beginning." "Not from the first day, but soon enough," she admitted. "At first, I thought, he's like his father, Just another arrogant billionaire. But then I saw glimpses of who you really were. Kind, thoughtful. It conflicted with everything I thought I knew about your family. Marcus's hands tightened into fists at his sides. I never intended to use a lie as a weapon. I wanted so badly to not be seen as a bank account. She placed the file of photos on a folding chair, then turned back to him. I get it, in some way. But when you withheld your identity, it felt like you didn't trust me, he sighed, raking a hand through his hair. I understand if you can't forgive me. I have no right to ask for it. But I need you to know, saving this center isn't about buying your affection or erasing my father's wrongdoing. It's about trying to make things right for all the people who suffered because of that past, and because I care about you, about your work. A flicker of raw emotion passed over her face. That day you told me the truth, some part of me already suspected. But hearing you say it, it felt like the ground shifted under my feet. Suddenly, everything was real. The man I was letting into my life was tied to my greatest family trauma. Marcus took a small step closer. I'm sorry. She exhaled shakily, eyes misting with tears. I know. And part of me wants to run and never look back. But another part sees how genuine you are, how hard you've worked to correct your father's legacy. I can't ignore that. He dared reach out, brushing a tear from her cheek with the back of his knuckle. I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'm not the man who hurt your father, but I won't rush you. If you need time, or if you choose to walk away, I'll respect that. She closed her eyes, leaning into his gentle touch for a heartbeat. Then, regaining composure, she stepped back, shoulders quivering with restrained emotion. I can't promise anything right now. My heart's torn. Marcus. You represent both hope and painful memories. He nodded, swallowing a lump in his throat. I understand, and I'll be here helping you rebuild this place, whether or not you ever choose me. A heavy stillness settled between them, punctuated only by the distant hum of an air vent. In the hallway, someone called Olivia's name, and she turned her head reluctantly. I have to go, she whispered. We'll talk more soon. She picked up the file and walked out. Marcus lingered, staring at the empty doorway. The confrontation with the past wasn't over. He sensed many more difficult conversations lay ahead. But at least now, truths were on the table, and that meant they had a chance, however slim, at forging something honest. Rubbing his temples, he glanced around the future reading room. In many ways, it symbolized his deepest wish, to turn something broken into a space of learning and healing. He could only hope Olivia might allow that same transformation between them. He left the room with heart pounding, uncertain but determined. The final challenge lay just ahead, finding a way to prove that hope could trump old wounds and that love could shine through the darkness of regret. The sound of hammering and the scent of fresh paint filled the corridors of Riverside Community Center. Contractors bustled about, some installing new light fixtures, while others carted in lumber for the soon-to-be renovated classrooms. For the first time in weeks, an air of optimism permeated every corner of the aging building. Marcus stood near the entrance, reviewing a clipboard filled with notes on the progress. He wore a simple flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, as though blending in with the crew. Though he was footing most of the renovation bill, he insisted on being hands-on, determined to ensure no detail was overlooked. Hank walked over, wiping sweat from his brow. They're about halfway done replacing the old pipes, which means we won't have to worry about leaks come winter. Folks are already talking about how great this place is gonna look. That's good news, Marcus replied, glancing at the row of rooms yet to be tackled. What about the new reading room? Hank nodded. Drywall's up. Shouldn't be long now before they paint it. Then Olivia can arrange the books however she wants. The mention of Olivia's name brought a flicker of unease to Marcus's expression. In the days since their difficult conversation, they'd worked side by side, but their interactions remained cautious. She treated him politely, thanking him for his contributions and updating him on the literacy program, yet he felt a wall between them, made of equal parts hurt and lingering uncertainty. Hank seemed to sense his tension. "Give her time," he said quietly. "She's been through more than most can imagine." Marcus exhaled. "I know. I just hope she can see I'm doing this for the center, not to prove anything extravagant." "Anyone can tell you genuinely care," Hank replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "She'll come around if it's meant to be." That afternoon, Marcus attended a meeting with Lucy and the lead contractor to finalize the budget. Afterward, he found Olivia in the future reading room, wearing paint-splattered jeans and a determined look. She was kneeling beside boxes of donated books, separating them by difficulty level. He approached carefully, clipboard tucked under his arm. "Hey, I can help if you want." She didn't glance up immediately. "Sure, thanks. I'm organizing these by category: basic literacy, intermediate readers, GED study guides, that sort of thing." He crouched beside her, picking up a worn paperback. "What about this one?" "Intermediate," she said, then paused. "It's an anthology of short stories, usually good for adults transitioning to more complex texts." He filed it into a labeled box, the shuffle of pages the only sound between them for a moment. Eventually, Olivia cleared her throat. "The community's buzzing with excitement about the improvements. Stella says the next enrollment session might hit record numbers." Marcus managed a small smile. "That's great. More people will have the resources they need." She nodded, carefully setting aside a dog-eared dictionary. "You've done a lot, Marcus, more than I ever anticipated." He kept his eyes on the stack of books. "I only wish I'd been open from the start." At that, she let out a quiet sigh. "Me too. But we can't change how we got here. At least this place will stand as a safe haven for years to come." She lifted another book, her hands lingering on the cover. "Remember, Mr. Garvey, he started reading advanced short stories last week. He's thrilled. He even said he might attempt his first novel soon." "That's incredible," Marcus replied softly, trying to catch her gaze. "That's exactly why these programs matter so much." She looked up at him then, her features gentler than he'd seen in days. "And it's why I'm grateful for everything you've done. I hope you know that." His throat tightened. "Thank you. It means a lot to hear you say it." Silence stretched between them again, but this time it felt less hostile, as though they were standing on the edge of something fragile yet promising. Then a painter called from the hallway, needing Olivia's input on color swatches. She rose quickly, brushing off her jeans. "Duty calls," she said with a faint smile, excusing herself. Marcus watched her go, heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The day had held a faint glimmer of warmth in her demeanor, but he didn't want to assume too much too soon. Turning back to the boxes, he carefully resumed sorting, each labeled volume a small step toward the new beginning, the center, and perhaps he and Olivia desperately needed. That evening, as the last of the workers packed up tools, Marcus stood outside under the building's awning. The drizzle from earlier had stopped, leaving the streets damp and reflective. He stared at the neon glow of a nearby lamppost, recalling how, not so long ago, he'd felt disconnected from everyone and everything around him. Now, despite the uncertainties, he felt a sense of belonging. He'd helped transform the community center from a place on the brink of closure into a beacon of possibility. And in doing so, he'd begun to transform himself, peeling away layers of distrust and fear. His phone buzzed. A text from Lucy. "Proud of you, big brother. Keep it up. Good things will follow." He typed a quick thanks, slipping the phone back into his pocket. A single car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminating him, then disappearing into the night. Taking one last look at the center's new facade, temporary scaffolding and all, he allowed a flicker of a smile. A new beginning was indeed dawning for the community and possibly for him and Olivia. He only hoped that they could both step forward, unburdened by old wounds and open to the fragile promise of tomorrow. Marcus squinted at the bright sunlight reflecting off the Charles River as he walked through Boston's lively waterfront district. He'd come here for a breather, to think about how he might mend the final strands of tension between him and Olivia. The crisp breeze off the water carried the smell of salt and a hint of autumn leaves drifting down from nearby trees. He slowed his pace when he spotted a familiar figure sitting on a bench. Howard Green, his old mentor. Marcus had left him a message the day before, asking if they could catch up. It was no surprise Howard had chosen this scenic spot. Howard stood as Marcus approached, offering a warm handshake. "Been hearing about all the big changes at the community center," he said, arching an eyebrow. "I assume you're behind most of it." Marcus shrugged modestly. "I did what needed doing, couldn't let the place shut down." They settled on the bench, gazing at the water where sailboats glided in the distance. For a few moments, neither spoke. The hush was comforting, a pause in the rush of life. Eventually, Howard turned to him. "How's Olivia?" Marcus let out a heavy exhale. "Still guarded. She's grateful for the help, but we haven't resolved everything. My lies, my father's past. It's all a lot to untangle." Howard pursed his lips thoughtfully. "I'm proud of you for opening up, though. That took courage, given your history of betrayals." Marcus fiddled with the hem of his jacket. "It wasn't as if I had much choice. If I wanted any chance at a real relationship, I had to be honest." Howard nodded, contemplating the gentle ripples in the river. "Honesty is the first step, but it's not the only step. Actions have to follow." Marcus thought about the countless hours he'd spent at the community center, ensuring the renovations went smoothly, organizing finances so that every project was fully funded. Yet, a quiet voice in his head reminded him that no amount of money could heal Olivia's wounds if she didn't feel safe letting him in. "She does talk to me about the program, about the students," he said slowly. "It's like we're partners in a project. But when it comes to anything personal," Howard patted Marcus's shoulder, "give her room, but also let her see your heart. Not just your generosity. Show her what you believe in, what dreams you carry. That kind of vulnerability can bridge even the deepest gap." They spent another hour chatting about life and philosophy, recalling old college stories that made Marcus smile for the first time in days. As the sun rose higher, they parted ways, with Howard's parting words echoing in Marcus's mind. "Show her your heart." Late that afternoon, Marcus returned to his penthouse, once a symbol of his isolation, now a place he considered strangely empty without Olivia's warmth. Flipping on the lights, he wandered into his study, where he'd recently placed a photo from the community center fundraiser. It showed him and Olivia standing in front of a booth, she wearing a soft grin and he with an awkward half-smile. In that moment, before all the revelations, they'd appeared content. He reached for his phone, heart pounding. Could he follow Howard's advice and show Olivia more of himself? He knew she cared about open communication, about trust built through honesty. Perhaps that was what they both needed. He typed a short message. "Olivia, would you join me for dinner at my place? We can cook something simple and talk if you're willing. No pressure." He stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the send button. Nerves fluttered in his stomach. Finally, he pressed send. Minutes passed with no reply, then an hour. The city lights began to twinkle outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, and Marcus felt his earlier resolve waver. Maybe this was too soon, too pushy. Just when he was about to give up, his phone buzzed. A single line from Olivia. "Dinner might be good, Tomorrow evening. Relief coursed through him so intensely he nearly sank onto the couch in gratitude. Yes, tomorrow evening, he thought, typing back an enthusiastic agreement. Now, all that remained was to pray that over a simple meal and honest words, they might take one step closer to coming home changed, together. The next evening, Marcus found himself hovering in his own kitchen, nerves jumping at every small sound. He'd picked up groceries that morning, fresh produce, a choice cut of salmon, a decent bottle of wine, determined to prepare something homey yet special. Cooking had never been his forte, but Lucy had texted him a simple recipe, insisting he not rely on a personal chef or takeout. "Cook for her yourself," she'd said. "Show you're willing to put in the effort." Soft music played from a nearby speaker as he set the table for two. His penthouse, once the epitome of modern luxury, suddenly felt too large, too austere. He'd tried to warm it up by placing fresh flowers on the marble countertop and dimming the overhead lights to a gentle glow. A quiet knock on the door made his heart skip. He hurried over, hesitating a split second before opening it to find Olivia standing in the hallway. She wore a casual sweater and jeans, hair loosely braided over one shoulder. A faint, cautious smile tugged at her lips. "Hi," she said softly. "I know I'm a few minutes early." "That's fine," he replied, stepping aside. "Come in." She slipped past him, glancing around. Marcus watched her reaction as she took in the sleek furniture, the panoramic city view through the windows. He sensed her unease. This opulent setting stood in stark contrast to the community center halls they'd roamed together. "Your place is impressive," she admitted, walking slowly into the living area. He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's mostly for convenience. I used to entertain clients here, but I rarely do that anymore." She nodded, fiddling with a loose thread on her sweater. "Smells good, whatever you're making." "Salmon," he said, heart pounding. "Let me just check on it." In the kitchen, he opened the oven, relieved the fish looked neither burnt nor undercooked. Olivia lingered by the counter, clearly hesitant about where to stand. He offered a small grin. "I'm not a master chef, but Lucy swore this recipe was foolproof." "She does know her way around a recipe," Olivia replied, and a flicker of amusement crossed her face. They sat down to eat, the atmosphere initially thick with unspoken tension. Marcus poured wine, his hand slightly unsteady. He asked about the day's progress at the center. She mentioned meeting with the literacy class, some of whom were excited to try the newly updated computer lab. Over the meal, conversation tiptoed between safe topics: the center's schedule, Hank's plans for a small security upgrade, Stella's new lesson ideas. Gradually, though, the mood eased, and Olivia began to ask about him, about the life he'd led before their paths crossed. "How did you build your company?" she asked, setting her fork down. "I've heard bits and pieces, but I'm curious about your own words." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "I founded Sterling Technologies after college, focusing on niche software solutions for businesses. It took off faster than I expected, so I poured everything into scaling it up. By my late 20s, I was working 14-hour days, living off takeout, half asleep at best." He traced the rim of his wine glass. "The money came quickly too, but so did the mistrust. My father's shady reputation cast a shadow on everything I did. Then, when people realized I had resources, it complicated relationships." She nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "That's why you were so guarded." "Yes," he admitted. "I'd had enough experiences where trust was broken, friends, partners, relationships. So by the time I walked into that café, I'd convinced myself everyone was out to use me." Olivia sipped her wine. "That must have been lonely." "Extremely." He forced a wry smile. "Until I met a certain waitress who actually cared about people." A gentle flush warmed her cheeks, but she didn't break eye contact. "I'm no saint, Marcus. I just couldn't ignore the struggles around me." He reached across the table, resting his hand lightly on hers. She tensed slightly, but didn't pull away. "You inspired me," he said earnestly. "You made me see that compassion still exists, that not everyone wants something from me." She studied his expression, shoulders visibly relaxing. "I'm sorry I assumed the worst about your family, about you. But understanding what your father did to my dad, it's still hard to separate all the pain." Marcus nodded, withdrawing his hand to let her speak freely. "I know, and I'll never dismiss that." They talked long after their plates were empty, eventually drifting to the couch with cups of tea. Olivia asked more about his mother, who had passed away when he was in college, and he recounted one of his fondest memories, how she insisted on baking homemade cupcakes for every charity fundraiser, no matter how busy life got. "That's probably where I got my philanthropic streak," he said, smiling ruefully. "From her, not my dad." Olivia listened intently, soaking in the details. She, in turn, opened up about her mother, who still lived in a small apartment in another state. "Mom's health isn't the best," she admitted quietly. "I'd like to move her closer someday, once I can afford it." They fell into a companionable hush, the tension of earlier replaced by a tentative closeness. Marcus set his mug aside, shifting to face her. "Thank you for coming tonight. It means a lot." She managed a soft nod. "I'm glad you invited me. I'd miss talking like this, even though it's still complicated." He brushed a stray hair from her forehead, heart full yet cautious. "We can take things slow, one day at a time." She swallowed, tears edging her eyes. "I'd like that." In that fragile moment, they weren't a billionaire businessman and a dedicated waitress-turned-educator with a painful past. They were simply two people, laying bare their lessons learned, daring to hope for a future built on truth. Over the next few weeks, a steady rhythm took hold. The community center repairs wrapped up on schedule, fresh coats of paint, new flooring, upgraded plumbing. The once dingy hallways now gleamed under bright, efficient lighting. Word of the revitalization spread quickly, drawing both returning and new students to Olivia's literacy program. Amid the steady hum of progress, Marcus and Olivia settled into a pattern of cautious closeness. They continued to spend time together, sometimes at the newly renovated center, other times over quiet dinners in Marcus's penthouse or simpler meals at local diners. Their discussions grew more personal, yet both remained mindful of the trust that was still healing. One crisp autumn morning, Lucy invited them both to a small legal signing ceremony at her firm. Although the property purchase had been finalized, Lucy had scheduled a second meeting to handle the final transfer of management documents. It was a symbolic step, solidifying that the community center would remain protected under the new agreement. Marcus, dressed in a casual blazer, arrived with Olivia on his arm. She wore a soft smile that hinted at both pride and lingering nerves. Inside the conference room, Stella, Hank, and a few other center volunteers waited, looking a bit awed by the polished surroundings. Lucy cleared her throat, motioning for silence. "We're here to finalize the last step in ensuring Riverside Community Center's future. The building now belongs to a philanthropic trust set up by Marcus Sterling, which guarantees stable funding and moderate rent for the center's operations." Applause and relieved laughter rippled through the group. Stella dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, openly weeping in gratitude. Hank patted Marcus's back with a grin, muttering, "Never thought I'd see the day." Then Lucy handed a pen to Olivia. "We want you to co-sign as the representative of the center's literacy program, if you're willing. It'll grant you a voice in future decisions about renovations and expansions." A soft gasp escaped Olivia's lips. "Me? Are you sure?" Marcus nodded, meeting her gaze. "Who better? You've poured your life into helping people read and find their voices. You should have a say in how this place grows." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, and her hand shook slightly as she signed. The room erupted in applause once more, and Marcus gently squeezed her hand, a wave of warmth flooding him at the sight of her genuine smile. After the paperwork was settled, the group dispersed, and Lucy discreetly ushered everyone out to give Marcus and Olivia a private moment in the conference room. They lingered near a large window, the city skyline stretching out before them. Olivia exhaled, still clutching the pen. "This doesn't feel real. When I think of how close we came to losing everything." "But we didn't," Marcus said, taking a small step closer, "because you never stopped fighting. You were the soul of that place, Olivia." She ducked her head, a self-conscious laugh escaping. "It wasn't just me. Everyone put in the work. You, Stella, Hank, all the volunteers, even Lucy. And of course, the funding helped." She paused, then looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "You helped save it, Marcus. Thank you." They stood in silence for a heartbeat, the gentle hum of the air conditioning the only sound. Then Olivia reached out, fingers tentatively sliding through his. "I know we've come a long way from where we started. My dad's pain, your fear of being used, all of it still lingers, but I'm learning to forgive. I hope you can forgive yourself too." His voice caught in his throat. "I'm trying." Warmth spread through his chest. "I never expected to find someone who'd make me want to risk my heart again." She squeezed his hand. "You already took that leap. Besides," she added with a quivering smile, "I think I fell for the teacher in you before I knew about the billionaire part." He let out a shaky laugh, relief mingling with emotion. "The teacher side is real, you know. Maybe we should collaborate on more finance lessons for your students." She grinned, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'd like that." Gently, he brushed the tear away with his thumb, then leaned in. Their lips met in a soft, tentative kiss that spoke of both their past regrets and their quiet hopes for the future. There was no grand flourish, no sweeping orchestral moment, just the steady beat of two hearts daring to trust again. When they pulled apart, Olivia rested her head against his shoulder. Outside the window, the city bustled as it always did, but for a moment they existed in a pocket of calm. "What now?" she whispered. He smiled, pressing his cheek against her hair. "Now we live day by day. We help the center thrive, keep supporting the community, and we keep talking. No more secrets." She nodded, drawing back enough to look him in the eyes. "I'll hold you to that." I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.